Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is October 5th, 2021, and we are super excited to have back in studio today the Margi Dehlin. Hey, Margi.
Hello.
We are continuing our series on telling believing loved ones about a loss of Mormon faith. And we weren't sure how many kind of episodes this part would take, but it's clearly an intense and a complicated and an important enough topic that it warrants at least 3 episodes.
The content goes on and on and on.
We hope that people are valuing it. We're getting a lot of really positive feedback that people are really enjoying this series, and Margi really appreciating your feedback. And they're also appreciating my co-host, Carah Perel. Hey, Carah.
Hey, John. Hey, Margi. I love these. I mean, they're just so helpful. I love it.
And you're back.
Yeah.
You were sick for a bit.
Yeah. How's my voice sound? I think I'm like 99% back to normal, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Darn
And
it.
Thrive for Women was a huge success.
Margi will tell you, but it was a riot. It was so much fun.
Carah, woot, woot. All the other women, yeah. It was a moment to be had for sure.
Well, it's great to have you back, Carah.
Yep. Thanks. Glad to be here.
So really quick, I'll be very quick. These are really important announcements, but I'm going to make them really quick. The first really important announcement is we have a retreat coming up weekend after next. Carah, is it October 13th, 14th, and 15th? So here are the, Margi, will you grab a flyer over there?
I can grab
it. Okay, so here are the details. If you are struggling with a faith crisis, if you are struggling in your marriage, if you are struggling in a mixed faith marriage, if you are wondering how you can raise kids after a faith crisis, if you are trying to improve your sexuality or your sexual relationship with your spouse or significant other, if you are lonely and are looking for friends, or if you're looking for community, any of those things, we have what is a really important event. It's October 15th, 16th, and 17th. It's me, it's Natasha Helfer, and it's Margi. We'll be in Provo or Orem for 3, it's Friday night, October 15th, Friday night, and then all day Saturday and almost all day Sunday. And it's just going to be one of these intensive faith crisis retreats. We've done these for many, many years. It's co-sponsored by the Open Stories Foundation and by the Thrive Foundation, and frankly by Symmetry Solutions and Natasha. But it's really affordably priced. It's basically the cost of 2 to 3 hours of coaching or therapy. But what you get is 2.5 days of not only coaching and therapy, but direct FaceTime with me, Margi, and Natasha. And you'll be able to meet people, possibly people who live in your general area, find friends, make community, hear feedback from others. It's a really important event. And so if you are struggling, we really suggest you consider signing up. You can go to thrivebeyondreligion.com/events, and you can scroll to the Faith Transitions Retreat there, and you can sign up right there. Also, if you can't afford the registration fee, but you really need or want to be able to come, we just need you to email thrivebeyondreligion@gmail.com. Tell us your situation. Tell us why you really want or need to be able to attend, and tell us your situation financially. And we will do our best to find a host or a donor to subsidize your ability to attend the retreat. So that's announcement number 1. Just the only other announcement is November 14th in the Salt Palace, we have an amazing Thrive event scheduled. We're not going to really plug that today, other than to say RFM will be there, Bill Reel will be there, Sarah Edmondson from A Little Bit Culty podcast and The Vow, she'll be there. Former NXIVM survivor Lance Allred will be there. Former NBA basketball player Carah will be there. A bunch of TikTokers will be there. It's going to be an amazing event. and we want to fill it. We've had to put down like $15,000, $20,000 to the Salt Palace just to register it. We really want to fill the event. Tickets are on sale and they're going fast. Go to thrivebeyondreligion.com/events and register now for Thrive. Thrive for Women was amazing, and we think this event's going to be equally amazing. So those are my plugs. Anything you want to add, Margi?
Nope.
All right, Carah, anything you want to add?
Nope. I will just make sure that these links are in the show notes, so you have no excuse. You're going to be like, where am I going to find the links? I will make sure that I'll make it as easy as possible. Yep.
All right. Well, we welcome all those who are joining us either through YouTube or Facebook. We live stream these because we want them to be interactive. So please do share your situation, share your questions, share your comments, and Carah will help us integrate them into this conversation. If you have questions or a situation you want Margi or I or Carah to react to in the live stream, we want to do that. And then also we always welcome or appreciate donations made either through YouTube or Facebook or just directly through mormonstories.org. The super chat feature on YouTube is really convenient, but those donations help us keep this program alive. So thanks to everyone for that. All right. So we have done 2 parts so far, Margi. We basically, in part 1, we went through a really detailed discussion of kind of like reasons to not disclose to a loved one or a partner, and then reasons to disclose. And that took up the full 2 hours. And I think it was really powerful. So if you haven't listened to part 1, we really recommend you check that out. And then part 2, we talked a lot about, when to disclose. And in both of those episodes, we did a lot of role play. Do I have that right, Margi?
We connected to the why to disclose.
Oh, right. Values.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think we actually got into reasons as well. And I feel like we're doing when today.
Okay.
We're going to start with when today.
So yeah, what's left, we've talked a lot about intention, about values, and about, why you would and wouldn't disclose. But there's just a lot of kind of granular details about disclosing to believing family. And the first thing we wanted to cover today was kind of the when. And basically, we wanted to talk a little bit about safety and disclosing in a way where you're going to maximize the chance of that disclosure being effective. So I guess the first thing to think about is kind of set and setting when you're going to disclose. And there's probably more and less stressful or optimum times to disclose. So Margi, why don't you start with that? Just give a little bit of background and then jump in.
Yeah, and can I share just a really quick side thought? I feel like we've shared it before, but I just, I think the nature of what we're doing here in these 3 episodes, it's just a great reminder that these are strategies, what we're giving you, and this is a messy process. And so, not to get too aspirational, I think here we have to be very gentle with ourselves and realize that we can do many, many of these things, many, many sort of right things, and still have outcomes that are uncomfortable because it is messy. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Just for kind of a healthy, perspective going into it. What we can control, what we can't control.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's fair to say that every situation is going to be different and there's no one right way to do anything. And part of what we're trying to do on the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis series is nurturing people their own ability to figure out what's right for them.
That's right.
So we don't want to be the gurus saying this is the way to do anything, but we do want to share tips and tricks that we've
strategies, learned. And we would love to optimize you feeling maybe less regret later.
Yeah.
If we could say that for yourself as opposed to, right?
Yeah. And I think you also make a really good point. And we've tried to emphasize this when we've talked about acceptance.
Yeah.
And, we did talk about the Nephi complex in that first episode. It's going to be messy. There's no way to do this perfectly so that you avoid your parents getting upset or your siblings getting upset or some sort of collateral damage. and kind of accepting that messiness up front is probably really important.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. But to begin on the when, one of the first points would be, at a time when you're not feeling a particularly stressful, it's a particularly stressful time for you or for the person that you're hoping to share with. So just taking a quick, assessment of what your life situation is like. And there's going to be inevitable stress if you're probably going through a type of faith transition. So, but we're looking for just to connect with yourself as to like, if you're feeling quite reactive or quite, pumped up, or if you can kind of get to a place of calm. And then let's say you're talking to a parent, then you would kind of want to look in their life as well to see, that they're not, suffering from a major illness. They haven't just moved and are feeling overwhelmed. We kind of want everyone as calm as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen people like choose to disclose, during an anniversary or, during a family event like
a
Thanksgiving
reunion.
or a reunion or Christmas, when there's going to be a lot of moving parts, a lot of stress. And this is kind of stressful enough. It's difficult enough to try and do it when this is the only major source of emotional distress or load.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I love it. Okay. So, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is kind of another factor in when to disclose or not is, figuring out is kind of where you are in your cycle. And so there's kind of early on in the cycle where you're still wondering if the church is true or not. You're still, maybe you still want to stay in the church and maybe you just want to be a progressive believer. Or you're really still not sure if you want to even stop attending. And my feeling is that, you can think a little bit about where you are in the process. And if you're really early, if you feel you're still just trying to get your feet on the ground, kind of get your bearings, it can make sense to wait for a while until you're really sure. It doesn't have to be that way, but like there's a really big difference between kind of being early in the process where you're still trying to figure things out and being much later in the process where you're like, nope, I'm sure about this. I know that my testimony will probably never be the same again. I know that I've stopped going to church and I probably won't be able to go back ever. And that, sometimes being a bit more towards the certainty side versus the uncertainty side can be a better time to disclose. Because again, if you're just kind of wobbling, but you're going to be right back as a progressive Mormon, staying in the church and attending, there may not even be a need for any type of major disclosure. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I really like that. And I think even emotionally that can work because I think, if you're in this still emotionally wounded place, which is a natural place to be where you're, the dust is still kind of settling, but you are feeling like you are still actively bleeding, that can oftentimes, I think, when we're looking at having conversations with loved ones, that comes across. And it can interfere with a sense of the clarity we kind of want and the groundedness that we would hope that you could feel during this kind of time of upheaval. So, yeah, I feel like there's the cognitive side of kind of having sorted through things, and also hopefully you have had that emotional support, time to vent, time to explore grief and feelings of betrayal, and that natural kind of wave of emotions that we all have to work through. And either we can catch it in a down wave, right? A down kind of part of it, or we wait until sort of that ocean of emotion is kind of semi-settled.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, a third is just the environment itself and how much stimuli is around. You want to talk about that, Margi?
Yeah, so that's another thing that I think can come up for people is just kind of the fact that what we don't want is extra stimulation in the environment. We kind of want the conversation to have the focus. So you can think about where you want to have it with regard to where it's calm. Also, maybe where you feel safe. So maybe it's at your home where you feel kind of a sense of safety. And, you might want to think about timing. What time of day not only works for you, but also works for them so that you don't feel rushed or, stressed in any way, that there's some time constraint where it has to be completed by. Oftentimes too, like public places can be tricky. So like restaurants or when you're talking about these things are a little less conducive than say a park or a place in your home so just some ideas is kind of take in or consider the idea of environment.
I love it. Yeah, you definitely don't want like tons of people, tons of interruptions, tons of people running around, maybe even kids running around. And you kind of want some privacy and some confidentiality so that everyone could just feel comfortable and kind of channel and be kind of in the zone. And that's not always possible, but it feels like that's optimum.
It's a nice strategy, at least something to.
Yeah. Carah, I'm just curious, as you're kind of thinking about your experiences and even the comments that people are making, what's coming through your mind?
That I like how Margi just said, like, what would be optimal. And if you don't feel like you had it, like I'm thinking back to a lot of the conversations I've had with my family, and maybe it didn't go well because it felt like, oh, something is just coming to a boiling head and I should probably talk about it now because if I don't, I'm going to explode. That's probably a time to ground yourself and realize that this is probably not the right time and space. And if you're wondering why that conversation didn't go well, it's probably because of like X, Y, and Z, and that like you can show up better next time and in the future and stuff. So like I'm thinking about all of the ways that I could have done things a little bit better, and hopefully the listeners will just slow down. And like it's a very important conversation, and you're not always going to do it right, but these are just some like mental checklists to think about if you want to set yourself up for success.
I love that idea, Carah, that it's just there's no rush, there's no hurry. People sometimes feel like, oh no, my beliefs are changing, I've got to tell the world immediately. And how about you don't have to tell the world and you don't have to tell anyone immediately?
I literally, the day after my shelf broke, I went on Marco Polo to like 5 of my closest Mormon friends. And I didn't want to tell them what happened. I didn't want to tell them what I read, but I was like, I know you guys have been worrying about my family and like what my husband and our mixed faith marriage is going to look like. Just so you know, I'm leaving the church. Just so you know, I just felt like I had to get it out there as soon as possible. And I don't know what, you can psychoanalyze me. I don't know why I felt like I needed to tell all of my friends immediately, but I did. And I don't really know the point of it now, but
I'm so glad we're talking about this because I do think for some people, for a large amount of people actually, and I really feel for this, is that you're feeling distressed oftentimes is what you're feeling. You're feeling this sense of overwhelm, of feelings that are really uncomfortable. And so I think oftentimes unexamined, what you want to do is get it out.
yeah.
And so it's a really natural, actually, it's a natural inclination for us to have to sort of want to just get it out of you. And the issue with that only is that oftentimes when we do that, it creates more tumult and pain for ourselves. And that's why I actually have a lot of compassion for why people do that, because it's a lot to hold, honestly. And we also come from a culture where we have been like, it's a bad thing to hold things back. Like we're put in these places where we have to prove and share all of our thoughts and feelings. And we're really accountable for that. So there's just a lot to, be gentle about with all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said.
I love it. All right. So there's the next part of the when is also very much tied to the who. So first section was when, second section's who, but there's kind of some crossover because there is, I think, at least one instance where timing really, I've seen timing really matter. And that's when you are in a marriage or, you have a significant other. And if you are the, losing your faith partner or spouse, and you have a believing spouse or partner, and your marriage, or relationship was very much rooted in or based in or tied to sort of a faithful Mormon contract, temple marriage, that sort of thing. One thing that I've seen cause a lot of problems is waiting too long to tell your significant other. And I'm seeing both of you guys nod your heads here.
We talked about that a little bit last time, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That you were saying like that actually happens sometimes. And I was just discussing about like with my husband, I didn't realize how out he was until it was like way too late. And then I had like my own existential crisis. Just it's a heap that goes on. It's like loss of faith and you haven't told me. So
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We have covered this before. And I think it just bears mentioning again that one of the saddest things I've seen, because your believing partner is going to, first of all, hopefully they're the most important thing in your life. In my optimal world, I love my parents. Margi's more important to me than my parents in terms of like the majority of my life. Margi's more important to me. I love my kids. My kids are super important to me, but like my relationship with Margi is the most important relationship in my life. That's just a fact. So because that's so foundational, and because when we got married, there was an agreement about faith, then changing that agreement is inevitably going to feel like a potentially a significant betrayal, just in and of itself. So that is something you're likely going to have to deal with, is kind of the changes in the terms of the relationship. If you add to that the complexity of your spouse feeling betrayed, spouse or partner feeling betrayed, that you waited way too long to tell them. And again, I mentioned this last time, let's just say you're on business trips and you start secretly drinking, or you start secretly, trying, experimental drugs, or you secretly stop wearing your garments, or you secretly stop paying your tithing, or any of the things that were kind of foundational to your contractual agreement as a spouse or a partner, then you're going to have to process the double betrayal, the betrayal of them feeling like you changed the deal and them feeling like you've been lying and hiding things from them. So in terms of the when, I suggest sooner than later with your significant other, sooner rather than later with your significant partner or spouse. And I recommend not changing any of your behaviors that are considered taboo or risky without an explicit renegotiation of your contract with your partner or your significant other. Margi, did you have something you wanted to add to that? And then Carah.
Only that I really love that. I really love the idea of, because I think it's so common when, all of a sudden we have a mixed faith situation, that the believing, I don't really love the believing, non-believing, but we just will use that because it's easy terminology. But for the believing spouse, that they can feel very out of control. And I love the coming together because it's this reminder of, and a solidifier that we have our own values, that we can come together, and it gives that believing spouse at least a voice, as opposed to kind of feeling like you're just a done deal and now you're off and doing your thing. And that I think we've gone into that. It creates this dynamic of digging in their heels and feeling like they really have to protect their turf. So it's just a beautiful, love it all the way around.
Yeah. And Carah, did you want to add anything to that?
The thing that's just on my mind is I edited a TikTok of Leah and Cody Young's interview when you suggested to them that you need to have like a new marriage negotiation contract. And Leah wrote this really beautiful document about what she hopes to base their marriage on now in the future, that they don't have the foundation of the church, that is not going to be what's moving forward in their future for them. It's something that's in the past. It's crumbled. So what are we going to share our values on? What are we going to teach our kids? So I was trying to look for the TikTok, and maybe I could put it in the show notes in a minute. But I just really think that's a beautiful idea that, me, 19-year-old Carah, jumping into a marriage, and you kind of feel like, oh, it'll be fine, because if we just follow the gospel's rules, we'll be fine. And then when you don't have that structure anymore for your marriage, it does feel like, oh crap, we have some real sorting to do about our values. And so I'm gonna have to find that video of Leah Young's, but I don't know if you wanted to explain any more of that concept. Maybe not, but I just thought that was a really beautiful idea for married couples to do.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have our own episode on the idea of second and third marriages. But it's just this idea that from Esther Perel, I think we first heard about it. Everyone's going to have at least 3 marriages. Not everyone, but most people are going to have at least 3 marriages, and it'll either be to the same person or to different people. And what that means is if you end up having one marriage for your whole life, it'll probably go through at least 3 or 4 or 5 different major phases. And each phase can require its own contract negotiation where all the understandings and the agreements fall to the floor, and you pick back up the ones that, because you're both going to change over time, and the relationship's going to change as well. And so there'll be, every, let's just say 7 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, there'll be this renegotiation where you kind of, things aren't working. It feels like everything's falling apart, and you'll want to work with the therapist or coach or just with, with each other. You'll need to let everything fall to the ground and then figure out who are you now, who is your partner now, and then what are the new pillars or foundations of your relationship. And that's, we can add Esther Perel's book there, and we can just add also the Leah and Cody Young YouTube, Mormon Stories.
Yeah, I can cue it up to that part of the interview even.
Oh yeah,
and put that in the show notes.
That's great.
Yeah, can I connect with that for a minute? Because for me, I feel like it's more than 3, like way more than 3. If you look at things like, early marriage and what the purpose of kind of early married life is with 2 people. Well, that's quite a bit different than when you have a baby or young children. There's a serious negotiation and shift that goes on there that if you're not looking at or intentional about, right? The old things that used to work are not going to work for that. And furthermore, teens, all of a sudden, being the parents of teens and having a marriage during a time of teenagers is fundamentally different. Empty nest. Oftentimes the very values or the attributes in a human being that make, such a great partnership when you're having kids and a spouse or spouses that are, wonderful wage earners or out. Sometimes, by the time empty nest hits, they're not great companions. They're not the people actually that you're like, let's go travel. Fundamentally different aspects of, I think, partnership come out at different times of life, let alone illness. If all of a sudden now you're a caretaker of a partner, I just think there are so many marriages within a single marriage. That's all.
Yeah.
That's so many changes.
That's great stuff. Okay. So that kind of wraps up the when of, when to think about disclosing. Let's go ahead now and move on to the who you should and shouldn't feel the need to disclose to. And Margi, I think this is where we want you to introduce a concept that has received a lot of very positive feedback in the retreats and the workshops that we do and the coaching. And I think we kind of co-developed this concept with Natasha Helfer. So I want to make sure and give Natasha credit for this. This is something that's come out of our retreats, the one that we're having in a couple of weeks, that we want people to consider attending if they like it. But will you introduce, Margi, the concept of level of relationship and level of emotional intimacy that matches level of relationship?
Yeah, so it's a very simplified version of how to kind of look at safety within safety and intimacy within a relationship. And I'll tell you how you can use this, but let's just go through. There are 5 basic levels. So it goes 1 through 5. And if you kind of think of 1 as kind of the most, let's just say, shallow, we're going to talk about the weather. We're going to talk about what we're eating, what we've been up to, maybe a book we're reading. That's kind of level 1. And then you kind of, level 5 would be, as Brene Brown kind of talks about, kind of the short list. It's like the people you don't necessarily need to filter a great deal for. You can show your full self and you feel accepted, cherished, and loved kind of in those spaces of vulnerability. You can talk about a wide variety of topics so that's kind of level 5. So if we were going to kind of fill out that, level 2 would be maybe you add a little bit of depth in there with talking about your children, or, kind of some basic worries there. You add, so there's some depth, there are some topics where you can maybe go a little bit deeper, right? Level 3 is kind of mixed. It's sort of like, I have maybe a few subjects I can go deep with you, and I kind of know what those are. But I also have areas that I know I can't actually trust you with. So there's a lot of navigating with like a level 3, but it's a kind of a balanced relationship. 4 is where you're not filtering a great deal, but maybe you can't talk about church stuff or, marriage, just to kind of
sexual stuff or whatever.
Or sexual stuff. Or so to kind of fill that out and why this can be helpful, or in what situations this can be helpful, is that when we're talking about, I know I brought this up before, but when we're talking about families, many times, like when we're talking about mothers or dads or a sister, or people assume if it's family, it's level 5, but
that they should be spoken to as if they're level 5.
That's right. Or that all family relationships are level 5.
Right.
And it's simply not the case. So pausing and actually taking a look at what that relationship is like for you, and where you feel safe and where you don't feel safe, and what your experiences have been when you've been vulnerable in certain areas, and really pausing to reflect on those relationships is so empowering to you. And it also serves as a filter for you to be able to know on what level you want to sacrifice, on what level you want to kind of, what would I say, like expose yourself to that person. It's just great for kind of, it's like a filter, it's like a clarifier for you. And before you kind of jump to that level 5 is the ultimate, that what we want are all kind of, this is also really helpful when we went into coaching as a family with our coach, Liz Dalton. One of the things that she pointed out in our family culture was that we existed too often on level 4 and 5 in our family occasions, meaning we always were having these kind of heavier, deeper, intimate conversations. And it is healthy in relationship with people to balance out. So let's look at one relationship, my relationship with John. I want times of level 5. I want to be able to be vulnerable with John and to feel safe. I want level 3s when we're out to dinner, where maybe I can share some things, but we're also talking about things. And we want to be level 1, where we're game playing and we're playing and we're laughing. So the ideal is that we can all move between these levels, right, in any given relationship, and we're not kind of sticking. So level 1 is not necessarily like not a great relationship. Sometimes fun relationships have their place, and fun is definitely important in the scope of a single relationship. But for the purpose of this discussion, it is to help you know on what level to disclose. If you have a level 3 relationship, we're going to have you match disclosing to that level of relationship and not go in with a level 5 when it's actually a level 2 relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I overload?
Carah's got something,
Absolutely.
then I've got something, yeah.
I I hope that, especially if you're young, like really listen to what Margie just said. Because I seriously, if I had a time machine and if I could go back and tell myself one thing when I was like a teenager, it would be that like some people are not level 5. Some people you're having fun and you're conflating, sharing things about yourself, and you're assuming that there's a level of emotional intimacy that's actually not reciprocated that you think is going to be there, and you're setting yourself up to be really disappointed. And like really early on understanding if people are going to be showing up in the same way that you want them to be, and if that's not the person that you're vibing with, it's probably not going to be a good idea to invest emotionally in sharing things about yourself. It's just not going to get there. And then the second thing I wanted to add is like, I want to ask this question to both of you, because I'm just thinking in my mind is like, I'm the type of person who I'm confident enough that if that does happen now that I'm 32 years old, and I can tell my mom over the weekend, she made some assumptions about why I don't go to church and why I don't believe in the Bible anymore. And she had some assumptions, and so I corrected her. And that takes a level of vulnerability. That takes like a level 4 vulnerability to be like, I'm going to share with you actually my reasons. So I wanted to ask, for somebody like me who I can show up and I can say exactly what's on my heart, knowing full well it's going to go over her head. She's not going to process it. She's just going to go back to reiterate her own opinions about me in her head. All I can say is I showed up and I articulated myself well. But for people who are in a space where like, I need my mom to get me, and then they're just going to be disappointed. Do you know what I mean? There's different types of people where it's like, okay, somebody has been backstabbing me 500 times. I can still talk to them, but like, I don't want to show up in a way that I'm going to set myself up for failure. So like, you have to show up in the conversation knowing like if this person doesn't do what you think, or just, you know what I mean? Mormon moms, like you still need a relationship with them. I'm still going to be a level 4 with them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did that question make any sense?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. And maybe you'll be level 4 with your mom, or maybe you'll be a 1, 2, or 3. Like the way I like to think about it is that emotional intimacy is really about kind of like taking your heart out of your chest where it's protected and showing your full, most authentic, vulnerable self to somebody of your choosing. That's what emotional intimacy is. By being raw and being vulnerable, and this comes a lot from the work of Brene Brown, by being raw and being vulnerable, you simultaneously have the potential to develop more deep and meaningful relationships with people, and you have the potential to really get hurt. Because obviously, the people that you hate are almost always the people that you once loved. You really don't hate anyone that you never really, at some point, didn't love, unless they just really hurt you or your family in some significant way. But generally speaking, we only hate people that really betrayed us that we once loved because they hurt us so bad. And so sometimes a parent can be a relatively safe person to really confide in, and sometimes they're just not. And sometimes you really do have to just say, when it's mom or dad, we're talking sports, we're talking weather, maybe I'll tell them certain things about my kids, but even then, maybe sometimes they'll judge me or give me advice that is not really welcome. And sometimes you actually really do have to boundary a parent to a 1 or a 2 level. And so I'm not disagreeing with you, Carah, but I am just saying that from my experience, not all parents are always worthy of a 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's exactly kind of the you have to be so intentional with these people. So we talked about earlier how like, don't automatically assume that just because they're your parents or a close family member that they're a 4 or a 5. But I'm comfortable enough to share whatever the opinion is on my mind, whatever my mom wants to know about me, my life, what I do for a living, my beliefs. I'm willing to share, but I don't get my feelings hurt if it completely goes over her head. If she completely forgets the conversation that we have. It's just like, that's my mom, and that's the expectation I set. But I still feel good when I'm able to express myself. Because if I always saw my mom and every thought that occurred to me was like, oh, I want to tell my mom this, but I can't because she's like a level 1. I was like, I don't know if I could live like that, Yeah. It's like, but it has to take a special type of person though. Like I don't get my feelings hurt, Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think the key that I see that you're doing is that you're connecting to yourself about that, which I think is the most important part, because here's what's tricky. People sometimes do surprise you, and sometimes your experience with someone could be a level 2, but amidst this process, you might be curious and decide to disclose something intentionally to see where they are in the present moment with you. And then you collect the data on that. And maybe they'll surprise you. And I do think there are situations where that can be healthy, where it can be like, okay, I think I'm in a grounded enough place. Things have been maybe problematic in the past, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable than maybe what this relationship is. And I'm going to see. I'm going to see what comes. And I like that because on some level, when you can do that and take care of yourself, then what you can kind of say is, I provided you the opportunity though.
Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't negate you the opportunity of growth. I gave you that choice and that, possibility. Now, maybe they're not going to take it. Maybe they're going to, and by the way, it's not just people being, mean or, sometimes it's just narcissism. It's just that you share something personal and you have a parent that just can't see you.
Or emotional immaturity.
That's right. Or so it's not always overt. And for some people that, especially if they've grown up with that they don't feel seen, that not having negativity is not the most wounding thing. Sometimes the most wounding thing is that they don't feel seen. And so this really is, I feel like you do have to connect with yourself. And I think honor where you are and honestly, unabashedly advocate for your well-being, for your health and your mental well-being.
Right on. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Carah, and thank you, Margi. Couple quick things. One of the most difficult things I see people experience in my coaching and in these retreats and workshops is mourning and grieving the downgrade of a relationship. So they think that their parents are fives, but then they're continually getting hurt by their parents for what they say or what they do. And what they realize is my parents need to be a 2 or a 3 because it's not safe for us to talk about our kids right now, or it's not safe for me to talk about my spouse, or it's not safe for us to talk about religion. And every time we do, I end up being injured. And so what that means is they have to say, all right, there are these X, Y, and Z I'm not going to talk to my parents about. And if they try and talk to me about it, I'm going to have to boundary them. And what that means is their relationships where it used to be you could tell them everything, now you can't. And that actually is like a death. Sometimes the downgrading of a relationship translates into something that feels like a death that you have to grieve because you thought, and we talked about this in episode 1 when we talked about the Nephi complex, you think that you're unconditionally loved. And sometimes you are. Sometimes you're believing family members will surprise you, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're not unconditionally loved. Sometimes that familiarity was conditional. That level 5 relationship was conditional on both of you being faithful to the church. And as soon as one of you is no longer faithful, they're no longer safe for you. And maybe you're no longer safe from them. And so sometimes you have to boundary each other. But the point is, a lot of people get really disappointed. Like, I can't tell my dad. I used to be able to tell my dad everything, and now I can't. I used to be able to tell my mom, I used to be able to tell my sister everything, and now I can't. You are going to have to grieve that. You're going to miss it. You're going to be sad about it. It's going to feel like a death. It may take you months or years. But it's better to downgrade somebody than to have them wreck your mental health and well-being and your energy and your life. And so ultimately, and it also preserves the relationship. Brene Brown was really good about teaching us that boundaries are not only to preserve your health and well-being, they're actually useful to protect the relationship you're in. Because if your parents are constantly violating your boundaries and hurting you, you're going to end up wanting to cut that relationship off. Whereas if you're able to boundary them effectively and downgrade the relationship, you'll be able to start communicating in a way to where you're not constantly injuring each other, and that will preserve the relationship. But you will have to grieve it. You will be sad about it, and it will put a hole. It will feel like a hole in your soul. And the only thing I can say about that is the gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis is that you can replace that hole that your mom or your dad or your sister, used to fill, you can fill that hole with a better relationship with your spouse, with a better relationship with a friend who you're more connected with new adopted parents that you meet at a retreat or at Thrive or at a workshop or just in your local community. You can find loving people who do love you unconditionally that can fill in those holes. And it'll feel like a loss at first. It doesn't have to be a long-term loss. Does that make sense, Carah?
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, I just want to validate, because I'm still so close to my faith crisis that I just want to validate anyone else who's listening that dang it, I have to downgrade this relationship because of this blah, 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 just like this dumb thing that this religion, that's not true. And you kind of rage against the church, and you kind of have to go through an angry stage because you're so frustrated that these relationships will never be the same again. So I just want to validate that there's like that angry space. We talked about this in Leah Young's episode as well, just how frustrating it is that we have to learn so many of these things for something that, in my opinion, isn't true and isn't founded in reality, and that hurts a lot of people. And it just is really frustrating, like when your parents still hold on to it more than their love for you, and that becomes conditional. There's a frustration there. I just want to validate that it's hard. It's super hard to go through.
It's super hard.
It is. I just feel like the wounding is real. That loss is real. And I think you can actively grieve someone who is alive in your life. You can grieve the relationship that you know will never be. And that is something that I feel like takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of practice. And we mentioned things like, you're going to have to grieve and you're going to have to feel the loss. And I just think that deserves its own episode. I don't know that we actively know how to do that in our culture, that we see practices of what it means to grieve and what it means to feel the loss and process loss in that way. So that could be a potential episode, but giving yourself time and space for that. I love everything that you guys have said around this. And I would just add, I feel like I've said it before, but sometimes we don't get to heal in the relationships where we're wounded. We don't have control over that. And I think it's natural, particularly as children, to want to heal our relationship with our parents, to take that on, and to single-handedly want to make that happen. And I would just say to that that's some of the hardest work there is to kind of know when to give up on the CPR for you and to channel that energy perhaps into other relationships that help you, strangely, heal the relationship with your parents. And one example of this is with your own children. And so sometimes I feel like I have healed aspects of some of the more hurtful parts of my relationship with parents with my children, in saying, here are things that have hurt me. Here are ways that I can connect to needs that were unmet. And I turn around and I look at my children and I'm just all over those things. And I'm probably missing other areas. I'm sure I'm, messing up in other areas, because that's parenting for you. But we can heal parts of ourselves through not only reparenting ourselves, but also in how we show up for our children, and at least saying, it's going to stop here. And my children won't know the same pain.
That's so powerful. And the only thing I wanted to add is how you just said that you will reparent yourself. And I just love the idea that even though you're downgrading some of these relationships, and that's painful, that you get to say goodbye. You get to let go of the person that needed to be that people pleaser, that needed that validation from your parents or whoever, that you get to also grow out of that person that needed that for survival. As a teenager, I had to go to church. I had to bear my testimony in sacrament meeting every month to show my mom, don't be worried, I have a testimony, to be all the things that she wants me to be.
Or to be proud of you.
To be proud of me, because this is her love language, is showing up in this way and conforming to her ideas about what makes a good person. Not only do I get to downgrade that relationship, that hurts, but I get to grow out of it to be my own person now.
Yes, that's great. You get to be free of it.
Yeah.
You get to be free of that.
Just the expectations that, for me, were put on me from 5 days old when I had a baby blessing. Like, it's not, to me, it's not fair to fit within this box, to conform within a religion that might work for my parents, but that caused way too much mental anguish for me to try to fit within.
Wow,
so it's time to grow out of it.
Yeah, it reminds me of the first time I read Shefali Saberi, where she said something like, parental approval is a major form of manipulation. And I was like, it really made me stop and think about, whether you agree with that statement unilaterally or not. What I loved was it stopped me in my tracks as to how I wanted to use approval or not with my children, as opposed to letting them connect with their own experience without me as a part of that.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, really quickly, I want to do a quick shout out, and Carrie, you can show this comment. Our dear friend Mindy Caldwell is in the chats today. Mindy just did 2 episodes with me on the Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow episode, and she's the wife of Steve Caldwell, she's married to Steve Caldwell, who did the COVID vaccine episode, and they're related to the Shannon Caldwell Montez. So I've been joking.
And she's part of our chosen family.
Exactly.
Hello. Mindy Caldwell.
So I'll just read Mindy's comment. Mindy wrote, I'm so glad that you mentioned this different marriages, even with the same person. Steve and I have definitely had a few different marriages in our 25 years together. And then Mindy goes on to write, these episodes are incredibly valuable. Thank you, friends. Thank you, Mindy, for that feedback. And I also just want to echo what you just said, Margi, which is that Mindy and Steve, along with several other couples, have come to be like family for us. So there's this idea of family of blood, and then there's kind of family of choice. And by moving to Salt Lake, we've been fortunate enough to find, several couples that they don't, I still love my parents and I still have a relationship with them. I still love my siblings. I have relationships with them. The relationships have changed a little bit, but now we have new families and couples that we've gotten to know, including the Caldwells, that have become like family to us. And that has not only filled the void that we once, that was created when we had to downshift some relationships. It's almost put that sort of, that hole to overflowing, because our life feels so much richer now to have these friends that we can tell we can tell everything to, and they can tell everything to us. And it's frankly a deeper level of intimacy than often we have with our own parents. And so that's really powerful. And then I just have to say, Margi, I just loved that what you and Carah both talked about, reparenting yourself. If I had to summarize what I heard you say, is that another gift of the faith crisis is that some of the damage or injury that you experience from your parents of origin, the gift of having experienced that, and even of having to down level some of those relationships, is you get to change how you parent your own kids. And the multi-generational pattern can end with you. And what you lose in downgrading a parental relationship, you can gain in upgrading the type of parent you end up being to your own kids. And hopefully they won't pass that on to future generations. And you get to reparent yourself in the process. And Carah, to your point, to me, a faith crisis isn't just processing the loss of religion. To me, a faith crisis also represents maturation. Because living in that first half of life that Richard Rohr talks about, of like being dependent on your parents' approval and like hustling for that love and hustling to requiring your own sense of feeling whole and good, to be dependent on your parents or even your spouse, frankly. What if you could upgrade that so that your core sense of health and well-being is just tied to your own values, and you knowing what you are, knowing who you are, knowing what you care about, and you feeling great about yourself just because of who you are, and you're living authentic and true to yourself. And if your parents or your siblings or your community or even your spouse can't really fully love and embrace you, you're walking still with your head held high. None of us are an island. We all need eventually, I think, to have partners and or loved ones who love us unconditionally and care about us. So I'm not saying you graduate to never needing any friends or community or unconditionally loving relationships. But what if your core source of strength and comfort and validation is yourself and not your parents and not even necessarily your partner? Does that sound scary?
Yeah. And it just reminds me of like, I don't want to get off topic too much, but I think in Mormonism, we are so afraid of what I would dream is like moral relativism, or like your parents are going to see you making up your own rules and stuff. And so you're so afraid to trust yourself. And there's this awkward space between you decide what your values are and what's right and what's actually right and wrong. What actually makes me a good person? What actually makes people want to be my friend or not be my friend? What makes me a good person, a good citizen? All of those things is you have to reshuffle all of that stuff now. And there's this confusing period I think everybody has to go through. And a lot of people have not figured out some of those things. Just because you left the church doesn't mean you're a good person, obviously. So like you still have a resorting to do, and you're afraid that your family's watching you, and you're never okay just like being in your own skin, being yourself. So I like what we're describing here is like, once you get to that spot that you feel okay in your own skin and your own values without a religious structure around it, that gift of like, oh, I have an inner, like, I know that my parents are going to call this moral relativism. They're going to think that this is evil. But like deep down, what do I think about it? And you're going to ask yourself that, and you're going to really ponder on it. And you're like, no matter what stones that they hurl at me, I literally am like, nope, I still know that I'm doing the right job. And to be honest, a lot of things in religion are very surface level. And that's one of my least favorite things about religion. I have some things I like, but my mom judges the most surface level things down to like if my parent or my kid's hair is combed, she thinks that I'm like a neglectful parent on like base level things. It's like, okay, well I know deep down that I am a good mom, and I know that deep down I am a good person, and that I'm okay, and that I'm making my way in the world. And I'm sorry you don't feel the same way, but you separate yourself. You grow out of you mature, and you're like, no matter what stones you hurl at me, I'm like, I know I'm okay.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk too much, but
No.
the place that I learned that, to be honest, was on TikTok, because you kind of live for the algorithm and live for views and stuff, and put up something that I know is good, put up something where I'm just going to talk into the camera and know that this opinion is, I'm so glad I was able to articulate myself on this. I've never been able to say this to anyone. I'm going to put it up there. It gets almost next to no
3,000
views.
views.
But you're okay with it. You're like, whether somebody likes it or not, I'm happy that I did it. And like that literally retrained my brain to not look for approval. And then in that, I started getting people's approval, but then I'm already okay without it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
So anyway,
That so reminds me of Brene Brown when she talks about braving the wilderness.
Really?
That's what the wilderness is. The wilderness is like that space where you don't have people, and you're forced to look to yourself to kind of, and her whole, I love that book. It says like a lot of different things, but one of the major concepts is if you can't in a moment advocate for yourself, connect with yourself, you will never belong, because you don't belong to yourself. So how do you expect to like navigate spaces with other people if you don't, on some level, you have to brave the wilderness first. You have to, on some level, do what you're describing, where you feel alone, where you feel like you're separating, where you feel like, and that you understand sort of, I'm not willing to take a hit to fit in or to get more likes, or to have my mom think the world of my parenting today, or that on some level you stand in the wilderness and you stand alone, but you're not alone because you're actually connected to yourself. And ironically, that's where we have the greatest possibility of ever belonging.
I love it.
you're not alone because you're standing with yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's actually a Facebook comment that we can highlight too. Debbie Hull writes on Facebook, to quote Frozen 2, quote, "You are the one you've been waiting for," close quote. And then Debbie writes, "Sometimes Disney just nails it. Be your own authority." And I really do think that is probably the pillar of our, let's just say the gift. That's the key theme of the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis series, is moving from the prophet as being your authority, your bishop, your ecclesiastical leader, your parents, your bishop, whatever, transferring that locus of authority from an external source into your own inner authority. You are the person you've been looking for. Thank you, Debbie Hull.
And I just want to highlight one comment. June Tunes says, These are all the things I didn't realize I need to hear, but I really do. Thank you so much. This is so validating to me right now. So I'm glad people are connecting with the stuff that we're talking about. It's some of the hardest, but most important kind of growth and conversations that I think need to happen. So.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go to the next kind of who. We've already talked about partners, and I mentioned kind of during the when that, your significant other needs, in my opinion, this is my values, but should be your top priority. But a very close second for me is children. And this is something that goes way back for me. Let's just say I'm in Logan, I'm in Cache Valley, and I had a friend who, it turns out, he had been through a faith crisis years before I ever went through it. And this was an older gentleman, a guy who lost his faith, before Mormon Stories had even started. And I used his professional services, and I found out that he was just pretending to be a believer, that he had an Orthodox believing wife, and he felt like if he came out to his wife as a non-believer, it would ruin the marriage. And he decided that he lives in Logan and his kids are all in Cache Valley. The last thing he wanted to do was basically take all his kids out of the church and then have them have to live in a very conservative Mormon area where they get ostracized and marginalized. So he made the decision as a non-believing Mormon parent to just not tell his children, even his teenage children, that he didn't believe. So he basically just made the decision to hide and lie and live a double life to his spouse and to his children. Now, I am not standing here today in condemnation of that friend. And I know that there are many people listening and viewing who feel like, and or in actuality really do need to make that choice. Again, intrinsic source of authority. Everybody's got to make their own choice, and there's no one right choice. I do want to sort of say how I came out on that. And there's probably three things I want to say. I think it would have, and Mark, you tell me if this is true. Let's just say, starting with my relationship with you, what would it have been like for you if I had just hid my faith crisis from you, found friends I could talk to about it, hid it from you, lied to you about it, and just for years pretended like that never happened to me? And then at some point you found out. What would that have been like for you? Would you have wanted that?
Well, can I also just point out in my relationship with you, and I think this is true for most people, you can sense when someone's in pain and suffering. So I could visibly see that you were struggling with something and that you were sad and that you were slowly isolating a little bit. And so I knew something was wrong.
Yeah. Spouses usually know.
Yes. And so I think, what I appreciated in that moment was kind of what Carah was saying, and we were talking about earlier, was that you trusted me enough to give me an opportunity, a possibility, that it was hard to hear. I definitely cried. I had my own response, but it gave me at least a choice. And it gave me the opportunity to have you not be alone in it. And I did not want you to be alone, feeling the way you were feeling. Yeah. And I think a lot of partners would feel that way, would be like, if you're going through something difficult, at least let's share it. Let's try to work through it together. So that's kind of but if it had gone on, is that what your question is? If it had gone on, it would make me really sad. And I have this feeling for my kids too, that I say, hit me hard, because I'd rather be hit hard with something and have you not be alone than you hold it on your own and to know later you suffered years and years, and you were completely by yourself.
Yeah. And that brings me to kind of this metaphor that I use about two ships sailing together. You can sail side by side together in a relationship, but as soon as you start hiding and lying who you are, imagine two ships that just start drifting apart and drifting apart and drifting apart. It can start out small, but just add, hours and then days and then weeks and then months to that change of course. You can wake up, you can just start at first, you're hiding your faith stuff, but then you're hiding who you confide in. And then you start confiding in other friends.
And then maybe you hide your coping.
Right.
How you're coping with all the hiding,
exactly.
because we are not made, most of us, to hide things.
Yeah. So as you're internalizing your sadness and your fears and your anxiety, fearing that if you tell your loved one the truth, they'll leave you, it starts to generate depression and anxiety because we're not meant to internalize all those feelings. And so then you start self-medicating either through, depression or binge watching TV, or sometimes people turn to alcohol or drugs or other types, spending money or other types of relationships. And what happens is you self-medicate, you grow more and more apart. You get comfortable learning to hide and lie from your spouse. And what people find is you do that for a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, and you've grown too far apart. You've done too much damage. And sometimes the relationship isn't retrievable after that. And not to mention how much harm you do to your own mental health and well-being as you engage in all that self-medicating from hiding and lying so much from your spouse. And that's just not good for you. And so those are two reasons why I think hiding is just not the way to go with your significant other. But I also want to add about your child. And this is what I decided, because even after you and I lost our faith, Margi, I told you that I didn't believe anymore. You read No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody. You concluded you didn't believe anymore as well. We still stayed in the church for another 13 years. Why? Because we had been conditioned to believe and think that you can't raise happy, healthy kids outside of Mormonism. And so we're like, well, I don't know of a better way to raise kids. I've never heard of somebody raising a happy, healthy kid just in a secular way, which was more a reflection of our ignorance and conditioning than it was any actual truth out there. And that makes perfect sense to somebody that wasn't raised in a high demand religion. Did you want to say something?
And you also really, am I right? You wanted to experiment with the idea of whether you could change the church from the inside.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I remember you actually kind of
sure.
feeling quite to try it out and see if that was something you could do. Okay, keep
Totally true. But then I had to think about, okay, let's say we're going to keep raising them in the church. Do we tell them that we no longer believe? Because that introduces all sorts of complexity. Because then you're like bringing them to church, and then they learn about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, and they're taught the LGBT people are living in sin and that people who smoke are bad people and all the things they're learning. And we're continually having to kind of correct all the things they're leaving at church and kind of process and deprogram their conditioning. And that's a challenging thing. Long story short, what I think you and I decided is we needed to tell our kids that we no longer believed, whether that was raising them in the church or leaving. And the main reason why is there are so many crucial decisions that a kid is going to make if they're being raised in the church. Things like, messages they're going to hear around sexuality, messages they're going to hear around masturbation, about modesty, messages they're going to hear about LGBTQ, gender identity, sexual identity, whether or not they serve a mission, all the things they're going to be learning in seminary and in institute and in college about church history. And then who they marry. Do they marry in the temple? Do they marry another faithful person? Do they go on a mission? And, do they pursue an education? How soon do they pursue an education? How soon do they start getting married and having kids? And what I realized is one of the absolute last things I wanted as a parent was to have my kid get to age 30 or 35 or 40, thinking that we were believing Orthodox Mormons, thinking that we believed it all, then for them losing their faith in the church, realizing that it wasn't true, or realizing they were asexual, or realizing they were gay or lesbian, realizing that the whole Mormon dream had fallen apart for them after they had made decisions about college and marriage and children and tithing and all those super important things. And when all that fell apart for my kids, and it will for over half of your kids right now, if you're raising your kids in the Mormon church, over half are going to leave it. Almost a guarantee. On average, it's a guarantee that over half of all your children will leave the church. The Mormon dream will fall apart. When that happened with our kids, the last thing I wanted was them to be able to look at me and say, you knew? You knew this wasn't true? And you kept that from me? I would have made very different decisions about my mission, about college, about my career, about my marriage, about my tithing, about when to have kids and when not to have kids, about my reputation and how I spent my time. I would have made very different decisions, Mom and Dad, if you had been honest with me. And you hid and lied this. You hid this from us. You lied to us. I never want to face my kids. And so for that reason, I feel very strongly that even as young as 8 years old or 10 years old, if your kids are still in the church, it's very important that the non-believing parent feel free to be honest and open with their kid about what they do and don't believe, and that they don't hide the truth from their kids and they don't lie to their kids.
Yeah, and I just want to make anyone who's never been Mormon before, I just want to make a quick distinction that this is why we call Mormonism a high demand fundamentalist religion, or sometimes it's called a cult, because this is not a Catholic church where you show up twice a year or something else. This is you dedicate your time, talents, resources, you change your underwear, you change your diet, you sometimes change where you live. And
give money.
10% of your income for life.
Yeah, it's not something that you can raise your kids in casually. Quite honestly, it's quite a full-time commitment. And so the truth claims of Mormonism matter because you are teaching your kids what matters about life and what they should invest their time in. And that's why Mormon Stories, we take time with truth claims, and we're also taking time to discuss how to leave the church and how to communicate with believing family and friends, because these decisions are so weighty on so many people's lives. This is not like another casual religion. So I just want to make that really clear that that's why we spend so much time on this.
Yeah. Yes. To add on to kind of what you were saying, so we did tell our children. We also decided for a time to give the reins to our children and let them decide what they wanted to do. If they wanted to go, if they didn't want to go, what they believed, what they didn't believe. We started having a lot of dinners with questions. If we had, and we were like, we were moving in and out. Children were changing at any given time, who was going, who wasn't. John and I oftentimes would rotate who would go to sacrament. If we had any child that wanted to go, we would go, one of us would go with them. And it took kind of years for that to kind of play through. And at the time that John was excommunicated, we had 3 children in kind of roles of presidencies in the church at
Laurel's
that time.
president, Beehive president.
That's right.
Yeah.
One thing that I do think is interesting to bring out is, and this is tricky for people. I think at that time, and hindsight is 2020. I don't know how this shakes out in the wash. This is the messiness of parenting and doing this. But I think we felt, did you feel good about kind of giving the reins to our kids and having our kids decide, John, in those moments and navigate for themselves?
Yeah, for sure. Because if we, this is something, and we have a whole series of episodes on this on Mormon Faith Crisis podcast. So if you go to mormonfaithcrisis.com, there's a whole 2 or 3 hours on communicating with your children after a faith crisis. Check out that episode because a lot of people can benefit from that episode. But Margi, I think you were really ferocious about this, and I followed your lead, but I was glad I did. We don't want to become the kids' new extrinsic authority. If we don't want the prophet or Joseph Smith dictating our kids' lives, but then we step in and say, we're pulling you out of the church because it's a cult and it's untrue and blah, blah, blah. How is that any different? So you and I, even after we stopped believing, I got excommunicated, you decided to resign because the disciplinary council was so horrific. We were committed to letting our kids make that decision for themselves. And for several months afterwards, our kids kept attending church and we would attend with them. We would take turns. We would attend with them. we were committed to letting them decide their relationship with the church. And that way they couldn't blame us if something bad happened. And that way, when they got to adulthood and later, they could always just say we were in the driver's seat for the major decisions we made in life.
And I feel like that sounds good, doesn't it? But it kind of, there is a kickback to that I feel like is worth noting. And John, remind me, wasn't there a study done recently of members and how many, wasn't it children under 18 that are LGBTQ, or there was some IA, and wasn't it, do you remember
I don't
that?
know what study you're talking about.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a study kind of that was done that showed that the percentage of members that will have LGBTQIA children, and that it was pretty high.
Oh yeah, they've surveyed BYU students recently.
Okay.
And I think the results are that somewhere upwards of 20% of current BYU students are somewhere on the LGBTQ sexual identity and or gender expression spectrum.
Yeah.
It's like 1 out of 5, basically.
Here's a bit of irony. So John gave a TED Talk, The Ally Within. And our intention and our idea when he gave that TED Talk was being an ally. And we were thinking, I'm going to get choked up. We were thinking that we were advocating for other people's children. But the truth is, we have numerous LGBTQIA children. We do, but we didn't know it. And that's what's hard about, is that I do feel like with some of our children, that they're having to work through a lot of messaging that they took in while they were navigating that on their own. And that's tricky. That's just a tricky thing. But we as parents don't know. We may not know how, whether our children are, as they're growing up. And so that, to me, was a bit of a blind spot that we had, that I just think is worth noting.
So it sounds like you're saying, even if people choose that path to stay in the church, they have to really come to terms with the likelihood that they might have an LGBTQIA child
that is absorbing damaging
right.
messages.
And if that's where your values are, because quite honestly, some people's values might not be like the higher value is just to keep the peace until, some explosion happens. But what I think Margi's trying to say is you don't know from the time they're 8 years old on what they could be absorbing until, there's some suicidality or some kind of attempt or something, till the crap hits the fan. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want our youth to be getting toxic messaging that they could be internalizing for years before you tell them that these messages aren't even true.
Right.
And we've been putting you in an environment, setting you up for some really unhealthy messages.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for all those reasons, I recommend telling your spouse as soon as you can, or your partner, significant other, and your kids, frankly. Now, if you are the doubter or the non-believer and you have a believing spouse, you don't want to just pull your kids off separate, violate your believing spouse's confidence, or, betray them by from their perspective, trying to take the faith away from the kids. So you want to do that with your believing spouse. And there's a whole series on Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis about navigating a mixed faith marriage. You want to do that thoughtfully and carefully, but communicate with your kids. Now, as rounding out this subject of the who, there's this idea of deeper relationships. Margi, have you already covered that? Or is there anything else you wanted to say about it?
I feel like it kind of blends with what we were talking about with levels. But if you have people, what I would say is during this time, you deserve to be surrounded by people who love and support you, and where you're not going to feel this constant fear that you have to filter for them and you have to protect them. And so, yeah, absolutely, you can consider disclosing to people who you feel you have that level of relationship with, because they're some of your best resources during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you just do an inventory, and sometimes it'll be your best friend from college or high school. Sometimes it'll be a friend in the ward, but don't just trust everyone. You don't have to tell most people. And we talked about that. Most people don't deserve to know. Most people don't want to know. We did a whole discussion about that for the reasons not to disclose. You can go back and reference that episode, but there's plenty of people. The most common response to someone coming out as losing their faith is no response, is like, cover your ears, cover your eyes. I don't want to know. Let's never talk about it again. And that's what you should just expect. And so since most people aren't going to want to know, or if they do learn, they're going to fight you about it or argue with you about it or try and change you or fix you. You really should just make sure that anybody you disclose to has really earned your trust and your confidence and is going to be safe with you.
That's right.
And I don't want to take us back to what we were talking about a second ago, but Jen Camp, you are awesome. And I was actually already going to read this question, and then they put in a super chat as well. So if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to highlight this question because we were talking about, we like to role play. We like to give people actual language and ideas. And I want to kind of set up this scenario to give people a better idea. So how did you guys do it? Jen asked, during this time that you allowed them, meaning your kids, to attend or not, how did you talk to them about your newfound knowledge, assuming like about truth claims of the church? How did those conversations happen? Like how much detail did you go into about what you knew?
It's a great question. Do you want to answer that?
You can go first.
Okay.
I feel like, yeah.
Jen, I don't know if you heard this before. I do want to refer you to, we did a whole several hour episode on communicating with children after a faith crisis. And so we won't be able to do that justice in the time that's remaining today. But just to give you the short answer is, depending on the age of the kid, you can say certain things. So you can, let's just say they're 5 years old and you're reading them the story of Noah's Ark, and you're reading about the flood and the God killing all men, women, children, and animals in the flood. You can say to a 5-year-old, now this is the story in the Bible. It's just a story. Mommy and daddy don't believe that God would kill all the men, women, children, and the animals. So you can let your 5-year-old know things that they're hearing. Another thing, let's just say your 6 or 7 or 8-year-old is taught in church that the second coming of Jesus is coming, and there's going to be plagues and fire and, brimstone, and that the unfaithful are going to torture, bleed and die. You can tell, or your kids are taught that people who smoke are bad, right? Or the people who drink alcohol are bad. You can have conversations with your kids, even if everybody's in the church and even if they're still attending, and say, Mommy and Daddy don't believe that everyone who smokes is bad. Mommy and Daddy don't believe that God curses people with dark skin for wickedness. Mommy and Daddy don't believe that God kills men, women, and children with the flood. That's, and we would turn that back to the kid and say, hey, kid, you don't have to believe anything that feels wrong to you. So if anybody ever teaches you anything about God or Jesus or any truth that feels wrong or sad or not right, you have the right. And even if mommy and daddy teach you things that don't feel true or right to you, you get to decide what you believe and what you don't, young child. So without even getting into peepstones and polyandry and, the Kinderhook plates, and DNA in the Book of Mormon, we were comfortable having those conversations with kids while we were all still very active. Does that make sense, Carah?
Yeah. Jen added, my kids are 15 through 25. And I think the short answer on that, what would you say, John, is for people like that have, they're in high school, they're in college age. There's no reason that they can't actually find out what their values are and if they match up with the church one way or another,
totally.
Right?
Yeah, totally. And one of the things that we got really comfortable teaching in a mixed faith scenario is this idea of the following. Daddy believes this. Daddy believes X. Mommy believes Y. What do you believe as Z? So one of the most effective, and you can do that at any age, 15-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 21-year-old. You can say, the church teaches X, daddy believes Y, mommy believes Z, and then child, what do you believe? And that's a really effective way to kind of have these sorts of conversations and model the idea that everybody doesn't have to believe the same thing. That in a family that loves each other, we can have different beliefs and still love and support each other.
Yeah, a couple other thoughts are just for me personally, I really like one-on-one. So talking to each child separately, that allows you to kind of curate what you want to say to the child's age, to their personality. We had one child that, as a child, I feel like maybe 12. Okay, so like, just going into, was just like, tell me everything. I want everything. And so I love the idea of it being child-led a little bit. And we used a lot of these things that we're sharing today. At least the initial conversation, we didn't overwhelm. It wasn't trying to get them to see the whole thing. It was very much like, we have some differences, things are coming up. This is how we feel about, we have some differences in belief and we're needing some space. And so you may notice mom and dad doing some different things. And then from there, we had these debriefings when our kids did go and attend. When they would get home, normally we would have some type of meal and we would ask, what did you like? What didn't you like? What resonated with you? What didn't resonate with you? And sometimes questions are the best things for kids to start connecting with themselves. And that is what you want. You want kids that start connecting with what they think. That's one of the most protective things they can have, right? Because that's where I feel like the church grabs us, is that when we actually don't factor in the equation at all. We hear, that's what we think, right? We hear something we need to do and we do it. And so that's kind of a loose form of how we went about really fostering our kids' curiosity, asking questions, what they thought about things. And the church, if you're in the church, it really offers countless scenarios for you to have conversations like this. Like, I feel like we were having them all the time. So also thinking that it's not one conversation you have, but now it's a way to connect with your kids long-term. So numerous conversations.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Takes time. And that should be its own episode, kind of communicating with kids. But I think hopefully we've covered a lot about that. As far as just rounding out the who conversation, I would just say, need to know basis. Only communicate with those who need to know. I don't even think you need to tell bishops necessarily. We've modeled this before. We did some role play where you just tell the bishop, we need to be released. For now, we've just got some really busy summer and things are kind of crazy. So, I don't even think you need to disclose your lack of faith to your bishop or stake president. And there are all sorts of reasons why that could be dangerous. And ward members too. Ward members, we've got a whole episode on the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis about communicating with ward members. They don't need to know. Neighbors don't need to know. And you can get in all sorts of trouble about people gossiping about you and communicating, making you a project, and even you facing church discipline just for telling ward members that you're questioning your faith. So I say you're safest to focus on a need-to-know basis and try to avoid telling anyone who isn't safe to tell, unless you want to be an activist. And it's a legitimate choice to just say, it's my values to tell everyone, because I would have wanted to know. I'm grateful for those who spoke up and let me know about the problems, because we all know the bubble is real. And so, so you can choose to tell everyone, to post it on Facebook, to post it on YouTube, to post it on TikTok, to come on Mormon Stories Podcast and tell your story. You just have to realize there is a cost to openness, and it can.
And a gift.
There's a gift and a cost. And you just have to decide if you are really ready for the gift and the cost of speaking up publicly, because it's real.
And may I add, when you do speak out publicly, as I started to do on TikTok and a lot of other people, you find a new community of other people who are also kind of badass and also want to speak up, and you get a new chosen family, like we were saying. You find other people who are like, yeah, I'm not going to let this cost risk analysis haunt me anymore. I'm just going to start speaking up, and you'll find other badass people too. So
yeah, I love that.
So we've got a couple more things we're going to try and talk just as we round out this episode. We're trying to keep these to about 2 hours each. The next kind of main segment is kind of the how. How do you disclose to believing family and friends? And there's different ways to do it. And you could think of it as kind of more and less personal ways to disclose. And I would even think of or more direct and maybe less direct ways to disclose. I don't know exactly the right word, but let's explore it for just a bit. So let's say there's anywhere along the spectrum from sitting them down and talking to them face to face, right? Let's just say that's on one side of the spectrum. Maybe a little bit more towards the middle would be like a phone conversation or a Skype or a FaceTime conversation where you're not necessarily in the same room, but let's just say you can see each other and hear each other, to just a phone call, which would be just hearing each other. Then there's kind of the less, I don't know if it's direct or personal, but if we keep moving down the spectrum, there is, doing it through email, right? Where you're writing it down and thinking through all your thoughts, sharing it in an email form, and then sending it, and then letting them read it at their own leisure and then respond at their own leisure. And then obviously I think the way to disclose that I recommend least would be through text. I just don't think you should ever really tell anyone this sort of thing through text or even like Facebook messaging or direct messaging. So that's kind of a spectrum. Margi, how do you think about which ones may or may not be appropriate? Again, let's introduce this concept of safety and levels of safety now to the form of disclosure. Can you see where those things might map together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and let me just say, I think there are strengths to all these, and there are weaknesses.
There's
to
no
all
one
of these.
right way.
Yes. So, and one thing I notice is, there's increasing vulnerability, increasing exposure. So face to face, you're going to have a lot of vulnerability and a lot of exposure with that you have a little less of if you choose email. And there is no right way. There's probably just a way to kind of pick maybe the best match for what you feel up to and what type of relationship it is and how safe you feel. So does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So if we were going to look at face-to-face, should we do like strengths? And like the strength of face-to-face is that on some level, you have all the information. You're having body language, and you have facial expression, you have body language, you have presence, you have, the energy behind you have a shared experience.
Yeah,
and
so
that's one of the strengths.
So much of communication is body language. It's the tears welling up in your eyes that may not come through in a phone call or in an email. It's the quivering lip. It's the body language. If they're uncomfortable, how they're sitting, how they're folding their arms. And frankly, if you want to communicate sadness or vulnerability or how difficult this has been for you, it's going to be way more effective to communicate that in person than through email. Because email, you can't always read tone. You can't always read the emotion in an email. Sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. Carah?
I've never heard of this before. I love this. Alex said, my wife and I just finished a course with Leah Young and decided to do a bit of a mix. And we wrote a letter and read it to them via Zoom. It was a good mix of personal and boundary setting.
Yeah, that's
love
great.
That.
That's a great
love
hybrid.
That.
Yeah, and that's a shout out to Leah. What I like about that is that you want to be careful what you say.
Yes, this is a weakness
exactly.
to it.
Yeah, because if you have, we talked about this. If it's just like, I'm going to just tell you all the problems and I'm going to be angry and
you
get nervous and flustered, you can really do damage. So if you take the time to write out the letter ahead of time, then you can be really thoughtful and careful about what you say. But then I like the idea of a hybrid of reading either in person or over Zoom, because then they can feel the emotion and it can feel more personal. What did you like about that, Carah?
Yeah, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
And I'll make a joke too that like if they start yelling at you, you can be like, my internet's going out, and there's a boundary.
Exactly.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're cutting out. Sorry, bad connection.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, but
I think, keep going. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and then I would, if I did that with my parents now, I would love to be like, and now I'll be open for questions, like a Q&A segment, at the end, be like, I said my piece. Here's what I want to say. Now I will be receiving questions. But yeah.
Yeah, I really like that because it takes some of the harder aspects of the face-to-face. Like for me, I'm a much better writer and I can be really intentional with my words. So it takes that. But it also, another part of face-to-face that can be hard for people is if they have strong emotions. So if you do have someone who's more of a volatile personality or if you have the type of relationship as a child where you care for your parent, you're a little bit more of a caretaker or a little more, you take on the parent role sometimes, I think that can be a tough ask for you. So if you have a parent then that really breaks down and is wanting you to take care of them, that's a tough face-to-face ask. Or you have a really angry parent that now is on a tirade and now you're put in this place of, a large effort. You've just made a large effort and now you've got a large effort boundarying session in place. So those are some of the tricky aspects of face-to-face is just they have no space and either do you to process before you get the reaction. You're going to get the reaction in real time. And sometimes space is good for everyone.
Carah, would you mind reading Elsie and Weeza? We have two really good comments. Do you mind reading those? Because
I was planning on it anyway. Yeah.
Awesome.
The one about being able to talk out loud at Thrive? That one or a different one?
Being able to talk out loud, and then Weeza I communicated via email.
Oh, you want to do Weeza's first?
Either one.
All right, we'll do Weeza's first.
Yeah. No, either one.
You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Weeza wrote, I communicated via email and asked people to respond through phone if they wanted to chat since we live far away. My mom and stepdad did not respect my wishes, and the response was difficult to read.
Okay. So that's Weeza sharing their experience with us. Mm-hmm. Any reactions to that, Margi?
Just how this experience oftentimes is a filter of sorts where, the data that comes in is it can be hard to take.
Yeah.
That you can make requests and you can again show up in this way of good faith, and what comes back at you can be disappointing.
Yeah. And Weeza is just reminding us that you can plan it all, like you said, and do it all right. And people may be, and probably will be upset and mean or unkind or insensitive in some important way. And you should just, do your best, and maybe they'll surprise you, but be prepared for something not going so great. And then Elsie's comment too. Yeah.
About Thrive?
No. Being able to talk out loud.
Yeah, that was about Thrive.
It is about Thrive.
So
being able to talk out loud was so good for me. I went to Thrive Women's Conference last Saturday and it was a big game changer. And I met her, by the way, and we hugged because she's always in the chat. Hey, I won't say your real name, but now I know it. Big game changer. I'd never spoke out loud to others until that conference or until at the conference. I guarantee so many people felt the same way as well. Never able to share your concerns with anybody that's been close enough to be vulnerable with. And it's, even though most people there you're probably meeting are strangers, but they've been through the same stuff, and that ups your level of like emotional intimacy to a stranger almost more than, your children that are believing or your parents.
Yep.
So that's what a faith crisis does, is that you have an immediate level of, Margi, you were there, like the level of vulnerability in that room of 800 women. People ask like, will it be online somewhere? And I was like, I don't think it ever should be, because it was just so,
I agree.
just like a good space for people to finally just share what was on their hearts. And
yes. And noting that how many, when they did the raise of hands in the beginning, how for so many who attended, that was the first public event they'd been to.
Yeah. How many, because we had people stand, I'll just describe at the beginning, Lisa Hacking said, how many of you, how many people had to tell a white lie to be here? And people will stand up. That's what they do at a lot of Thrive events. And then they asked, how many people, this is the first post-Mormon event you've ever been to? What's your estimation of how many people stood up?
Oh, what do you remember? I would just remember it being A lot.
I remember wanting to cry. I remember getting chills.
Yeah.
It felt like 90%. It
Yeah.
felt like every single person of an 800 room
Yeah, it
stood
was
up.
a lot of people.
It was like, yeah, I got chills. So just, back to Elsie's comment.
So we
about
celebrate
that
you,
is-
Elsie. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it's really hard. I totally understand. Like, I think we talked about this last time. Like, so many of these conversations, it's the first time you've ever even needed to have these hard conversations, and you don't, and you're going to be messy and stuff, and it's going to be difficult. So go easy on yourself. But any opportunity you can come to a post-Mormon event and you get to vibe with other people and learn from other people, see how other people have done that. We had like lighthouses, which is what we were calling the women who were like, had already been kind of like down the pathway a little bit further, that people could reach out and connect with at Thrive for advice and stuff. Like it's such a difficult thing, but I'm just so happy for all the people that showed up for themselves, to
That's
like
right.
improve their mental health, get a new community. So
Yeah. I do think is it Weeza? One thing I do want to just, if I could highlight that I think is important, is it's natural for our brains to focus on people's reactions, especially if they're disappointing and if they hurt us. And that we should process that. I would also add, do not forget, Weeza, to give yourself a lot of positive reinforcement, a lot of like, just treat yourself is what I'm going to say. Like, you just did something hard, and you did something, I feel like, that's brave. It took a lot of courage, and don't let that get lost in, people's reactions, which you have no control over. Don't let it take away from the great effort and the great courage that you show in these moments. Not any of you.
Love it.
I'm gonna cry. It was so beautiful. Yeah. So well said. Good job. Oh my gosh. Like, it's speechless. Go on.
What are you feeling, Carah?
Nothing. It's so hard. We still are, the DMs we get, the Thrive. I'm just like, so many, it's like really things are coming to a head. That just, there's so many people in this really toxic space that they want to get out of. They don't know how, they don't know how to navigate it.
Yeah.
But between what we just did at Thrive and this conversation, I'm just so happy that like people are doing the best for themselves and their families to get out of this space that doesn't serve them anymore. Like, it just makes me happy.
Yep.
Yep. Amen. All right. Well, so that's kind of the how. There's no right answer, but just be mindful about it. And you can do any combination. You can write it in email or in a letter form, or you can speak it, or you can write it and then speak it. You can do it in person. You can do it mixed over Skype. Just sky's the limit, but just think about how safe the person is that you're going to be speaking to. Think about what their reactions might be. Think about your own level of safety and security and well-being, and pick the right method that matches
Those
the person.
things.
Yeah. That's good. Okay. The last thing that I think we're going to be covering today is the what. It's sort of like, what do you disclose? And I'm going to give you my preference, and I've talked about this before, but I'm going to give you what I think is the most effective response I've seen on average. And that's the less is more approach. And I'll role model it right now. Can we do a role play, Margi? Because people really love the role play. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to do a bad role play and then a good role play. I'm going to do what I think is an ineffective disclosure, and then I'm going to do an effective disclosure. Is that okay?
And what's our relationship?
So you are my spouse. And I think we've kind of done a flavor of this role play, but I think we can never get enough of it. So you're a believing spouse. I've lost my faith, and I'm disclosing to you kind of for the first time. Is that okay?
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Okay. You're a believer. All right? Okay. So I'm going to do the more is more approach. All right?
Okay.
And see how that goes. And then I'm going to do the less is more approach and see how that goes. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you just give me your candid reactions. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You ready, Carrie? You can jump in if you have anything.
Can I be like a whiny child asking for a cup of milk? I'm trying to make it realistic.
That's right.
You
That
could
will
be
really
a believing teenage daughter with mom. So I'm dad disclosing to mom and daughter. How's that?
Okay.
Do you
All right.
want it? Oh, so you're not doing one-on-one either. So look, you're doing a lot of things.
So
in
I'm
this
choosing.
moment.
I'm choosing right now to disclose to my wife and daughter.
Are we also at Disneyland and we're in line
Are we at a family gathering?
where it's like, this is just not a good time? We're like happiest place on earth and you want to drop a
We're
bomb.
We're mixing too many variables. But I'm just trying to incorporate you, Carah.
Okay, I don't need to be incorporated. I am so self-secure. I don't need anybody's approval and validation.
If you want to do another one, Carah could be a teen child.
Okay,
that
well,
you
we'll see. I don't want to.
because people have been asking. Okay.
All right, so I'm disclosing to you more is more approach. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hey, sweetie, I've got something I need to tell you. Is that okay? Do you mind sitting down? Because I need to talk to you.
Oh, okay. Do I need? Wow, I need to sit down. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this is kind of serious. So I kind of need you to be prepared for the fact that this is really serious.
Okay. Now I'm scared, but sure.
Okay. So I've been studying a lot about church history, and I stumbled on this website called Letter to a CES Director, and then I also stumbled on to a podcast called Mormon Stories Podcast.
Okay. So those aren't church sanctioned, are they? That's not a church
Well,
website. Neither of those
I mean,
are.
I don't want to get too focused on that because I more want to talk about what I learned from those sources.
I'm not surprised if you're having issues right now, given where you chose to look. So I'm not sure I will actually am interested in you going to a random place. If it would be different if it was like a church website or a church that would be different. I need you.
Well, I don't want to get too caught up in that. So let's just say also that I read essays that are on the church's website. They're called the Gospel Topics Essays, and they're on the church's website. And I read this information from there as well. Does that make you feel better that they're actually on the church's website?
I'm not sure any of this is making me feel better, but carry on.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so from reading these various sources, I've learned some things that have been really troubling for me. The first thing I learned is that the Book of Mormon is not a translation of an ancient record, but instead it's like fiction that Joseph Smith kind of like, why are you shaking your head?
How could you possibly know that? How could you? I mean,
Well, you would have to read the material to find out.
no, I actually don't. I actually don't have to read the
Well,
material.
how is it that you can
to
judge
know
without
my
even
own
reading?
testimony?
But
To know
how
my
can
own
you
testimony,
ju-
there's nothing I need to read except the Book of Mormon and to know my own
Okay,
heart.
but I'm your spouse. You love me. You should trust me. I've read these things. You haven't even read them yet. You're giving me an opinion about something that you haven't even bothered to read yet.
I'm not going to read the sources. If what you're saying right now is things you've read now have affected your testimony, you're right. I won't be reading any of that.
But then
Because I value my relationship with the church and with the Savior and with my too much to do that.
But this is like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. Like this is the cult mentality of like people.
If you loved me, you would never ask me to do this. And if you loved the church and you valued the church and our family in it, you would never do this.
No. I
don't trust you. I
I'm
don't
telling
trust
you this
in
because I love you. I am telling you this because I don't want you to be in a cult. And if you're in a cult, you're basing your life on not all the information.
This is not what love feels like. This is not what it feels
But
like.
I'm telling you the truth. Truth is love.
You may think it's the truth, but anything that leads us away from the truth of the gospel and leads me away from my own testimony to what I know is true, that's not truth. That's no truth that I have any interest in.
But did you know that Joseph Smith had over 30 wives? Did you know that? Did you know that he had 30 wives?
I don't want to hear hearsay. I don't want to hear.
It's not hearsay. It's on the church's own website.
I won't be reading anything that comes between me and my testimony with the church.
And
I'm done with his conversation.
What?
And I'm done with this
I'm not
conversation.
done. I've got a whole list of things that I wanted to read.
I am walking away, but you can't see it because I'm sitting in this chair.
Okay. Carah.
Love it.
What are your reactions? Are there any reactions?
Well, first of all,
from
I just
viewers?
wanted to highlight a bunch of the comments
Okay,
where everyone's just like, I love Scott's comment. Margi is so savage as a believer. It's just like, it feels like a window into the past, perhaps even.
Actually,
not.
Ironically, no.
Margi was super understanding. And super,
Really? Okay,
yeah.
good. Yeah, okay, maybe a window into my past then. I was like, that sounds familiar. Yeah, and I think we're going back to the Nephi complex thing where it's like, you loved me before, you'll love me again. I don't want to be downgraded in your mind, like it's like if I only tell you something that you know is immoral, is blank, I'm going to throw out a church history fact that you know on an objective level is an immoral thing. If I throw that out in this conversation, what is the logic behind that? Like, has anyone ever been like, oh, when you put it that way, suddenly I'm like disarmed and now we're not fighting anymore? It's like, no, you've already gone to that emotional place.
Yeah.
There's no point in bringing up like kind of like objectable facts about what
That's
Joseph
right.
Smith did. You're beyond that. You're too emotional to be
I'm
talking
like,
about it.
I am defending my turf.
For sure.
Yeah.
Like we hope that like if only you hear one thing, you'll change your mind. It's not the space,
Yeah.
it's not the tone. Just cut it out.
If you hear the
Dehlins.
right fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mindy, our friend Mindy adds, John, you can't call it a cult, instant shutdown. And I was trying to model a bad example. So part of what I'm saying, Mindy and listeners, is Mindy's right. Rule number one is never say things like pedophile or sexual predator or cult when you're disclosing to a family member. That's the more is more approach. And it immediately is going to put those walls up, make them feel defensive and or offended. And so Mindy's right. Don't use those words. I was basically trying to illustrate that when you do the more and more approach, you start getting pulled into this conversation about what are your sources? Where did you get this information from? I feel dark. I've never heard this stuff before. You'll even tell your believing family members that you got this information from the church's website. And Carah, what's the common response when you tell them, this is from stuff I read on the church's website? What do they say?
That it's been like co-opted by somebody who's lying, or that it's misinterpreted, or
that someone hacked the church's website, right? Yeah, you just, the more information you give, the more you start to have an argument, it turns into a debate, and it gets derailed and it goes sideways. So yes, Mindy, you're right. Never use the term cult or sexual predator or pedophile or any of those words when you're coming out, in my opinion.
And in my opinion as well. Also, I agree with you. And I just wanted to add, we talked about this before, and if Carah has one thing that I want to say, I've been in those bad situations. I've been online for a very, very long time. I used to be the Mormon conservative girl on Twitter that was arguing with the ex-Mormons. And if you want to shut down a conversation really quick where I have nothing else that I want to hear you say, call the church a cult, call Joseph Smith a pedophile, throw out the worst things, because that's an ex-Mormon who's on an ego trip, who just wants to hurt a Mormon's feelings and tell you that you are a moron.
Yeah.
That's not conducive. If you actually care about somebody and you want what's best for them,
so good.
Don't intentionally hurt their feelings if we are telling you that this isn't helpful.
It's like, don't go in with the bombs,
Yeah. It's
the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
So-
Be smart enough. My one major critique of the ex-Mormon community generally is that we act like we love science all the time. Scientifically, we know how the brain works. We know what the backfire effect. We know these things on a psychological level. Let's put them into use and take like our ego trip, have that be in the backseat, and like the person driving the car is an empathetic person who actually cares about the person that's in the conversation with you, and not just hurling insults just because you can.
Yes, good. That's great.
Thanks, Carah. I'm excited to be able to read a comment from Scott Bubb, one of our super fans. Scott writes, once it gets to a certain level of anger, there's no turning back until we're all cooled down. And hey, Scott, thanks for your support, your endless support on YouTube, because you do great work there in the comments, Scott. But Scott's reminding us that our brain has different compartments, and one of the compartments of the brain is called the amygdala. It's the emotional center of the brain. Some call it the reptile brain or the lizard brain or the monkey brain. But what we know about the brain is that when you're emotionally triggered. And Margi, I'm guessing I emotionally triggered you with my.
I think for a believer, this would be emotionally triggering.
Severely. I mean, it would be comparable to like a lion charging at them in the wilderness. The brain often can't distinguish between physical threat and psychological or emotional threat. So you're potentially going to be triggering them at the level of a lion charging at them on the savannah. That's how bad it can get. And all of a sudden, they're not going to hear any words you say. Their IQ is going to drop. They're going to be less intelligent. And that's you too. When you get triggered, you become dumber. And all of a sudden, instead of both being of average intelligence or above average intelligence, you're going down into the below average intelligence. You're insulting each other. You're yelling at each other. You're just speaking from an emotionally charged space. And until you cool down and your brain kind of resets and shifts to the cerebral frontal cortex, the place of executive functioning in the brain, you're just going to be doing damage to each other. And so Scott reminds us that that's why the more is more approach is almost always destined to fail. You're going to inevitably push each other into the triggered space. You're going to fight. You're going to yell at each other. You're going to do damage, and you're not going to actually make any positive progress. True?
I agree. And I also think there's this idea of emotional intelligence that we can have that's part of healthy intimacy, where you can realize when you're entering into your partner's china shop. And what I mean by that is we all have these spaces inside us where it's fragile in there, right? There's a lot of china. And what we don't want to do as partners is to go in with a bat and start swinging it around and breaking all the china. What we want is to have a moment of realizing I'm going into this space. There's a lot of china for my partner. So how do I do that without breaking everything in there?
Yeah.
And that's just taking emotional care of another human that you love.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Margi. All right.
And would you mind if I read one quote?
Yeah, please.
Can I announce the person that we've been talking to
Yeah,
on Facebook real quick?
Yeah.
We've been planning this for a few months, actually, maybe even like way before I even worked here. Like you've been already talking with Anthony. So a lot of the ways that I learned a lot of these good skills was through street epistemology. And if you don't know what that is, look up Anthony Magnabosco, look up street epistemology. There's Facebook groups, there's Reddit threads, there's YouTube channels. Cordial Curiosity is another great one. So I would like just to announce that we are going to have, am I allowed to say this? You're not mad, are you?
We are hopefully
working on, I'm making sure it's going to happen. I will drag him from Texas here with my own bare hands to get Anthony Magnabosco to come talk to us about street epistemology on Mormon Stories. Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that resource
How
out.
exciting.
Yeah, we're excited. And we'll also, do you mind adding that to the show notes?
For sure,
We'll add street epistemology there. Street epistemology is just basically a really effective approach at talking to people about their beliefs. I don't know that it's necessarily, I'd have to think about how relevant it is for the disclosure sort of piece, because I'm trying to focus on the less is more approach right now, but it's definitely a super crucial tool to talking to other people about their beliefs.
Yeah. Starting off with just how we both agree what is true, how people go about exercising those values and how we arrive at what is true. And just as a society, like it's important that we have the same starting points of what is true? How do we decide what's true? And so even though I'm past disclosing to my parents about my faith crisis, I still use the tools of a street epistemology all the time to talk to them. And it puts like 1,000-foot view on the conversation. We're not talking about the issues. We're talking about how we derive truth. And I think it just elevates the conversation and takes emotion out of it, because it's just a good back and forth way to go about having these difficult, problematic conversations. So definitely look that up, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're looking forward to that. I'll do the less is more role play with you now, and then I think there's a way to slip in some of the Socratic dialogue method, Anthony Magnabosco stuff after the brief disclosure, because I think there's actually a real place for that even in the disclosure, but it might come after the actual disclosure. So we'll jump back to that. And yes, I'm excited to have Anthony here. So Margi, I am now going to do the less is more. So this is a different role play. I'm going to now do the less is more disclosure. So we're going to reset. We're going to back up. and I'm going to do the less is more. How does that sound? Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Hey, sweetie. And by the way, I'm going to also do the love sandwich approach, where I'm going to start by showing a lot of love and support, helping build a sense of safety. Then I'm going to disclose briefly, and then I'm going to end with a lot of love and kindness and support. I call it the love sandwich approach, and you're going to notice me do that here. Is that okay, Margie?
Sure.
Okay. So let's try and begin. All right. Margie, hey, I needed to talk to you for a couple minutes. Is that okay?
I think so. Sure.
Okay. The first thing I wanted to say is how much I love you. I want you to know that I am so grateful for our relationship. We've been married 25 years. I consider you my most important partner. I care so much about you. I want to be able to tell you everything. I never want to keep anything from you. And I love that you and I have this relationship where we can tell each other everything. And so I just appreciate that. And I appreciate how safe you make me feel and how you care about my well-being. And I never doubt that. And so I just wanted to start by just saying, I genuinely appreciate that. And I love you and I love our relationship. And I've never felt more committed ever to our relationship than I do right now.
Okay. That's really lovely to hear. Is something going on? Is there something?
Well, I do need to share something with you, but that's the first thing I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Because I need you to know that you are my number one. You're the most important thing to me, and I adore you. And that's why I feel so safe coming to you with something that I need to share.
Okay, I got that.
Okay.
Thanks, babe. Yeah.
Okay. So here's what I needed to share with you. And this may be a little bit hard. I need you to know that my relationship with the church, my feelings about the church have been going through some changes. And I'm having some questions about the church, and there's some things about the church that I'm struggling with. And I need you to know that. And it's been really hard, and it's been sad for me, and I don't like it, but I'm going through it. And I needed you to know that. And I just want to add that I respect your beliefs so much that I have no desire to get into details with it about you, to talk about any of the specifics. I just didn't want to hide it from you, and I wanted to let you know. And I also need to add that I'm not planning on making any changes. I'm as committed to you as ever in our marriage. I'm not going to be changing any of my behaviors anytime soon. So I want you to feel safe that nothing's going to change other than that right now I'm just working through some things, and I wanted you to know about that.
Well, that makes sense, because I feel like, is that why you've been isolating a little bit more? And I've kind of noticed you being sad more. You've been sticking to yourself more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure if you'd noticed, but yeah, I've been afraid to tell you because I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you wouldn't love me anymore and that it might hurt our marriage. And I care about our marriage more than anything else. And so I've been afraid to tell you.
I'm really sorry you've been feeling sad. I'm a little bit scared because I don't have a sense for what you're talking about or what it means for us, if that makes sense. So are you talking like you've lost your testimony? Are you thinking that what does this mean? What do you mean by?
Yeah, it's definitely, it has to do with the church's history and the church's teachings, but I'm still trying to figure it out. And so what I need.
Well, maybe I can help you.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to do is kind of show you the utmost respect, because I never want you to feel like I'm trying to damage your faith or that I'm trying to change your faith. And I'm still trying to figure it out. So if it's okay, I'm just going to be working through this stuff. I'm not going to make any behavioral changes, but I'm just going to be processing it. And when I get to the point where I really understand where I'm landing with all this stuff, I'm willing to maybe share with you some of the resources that I've been learning from, but I would only want to do that if you were requesting it, because I never want to ever be in a position where you feel like I'm trying to change your faith or damage it. I want to show you total respect in that regard. Does that make sense?
I really appreciate that. And this is just really overwhelming because I don't have a sense for how this is going to work out. So like what? You don't believe and I do? And what that means for our family? Like we're just different now. And now we're just like, I don't know how this works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary. And I understand why it would feel scary. And so for now, I would just say, let's take it like I'm committed to you. Know that that's not changing, that I love you, that I support your faith, and that I'm in the long haul with you, and that I'm not going to go acting out. I'm not going to start drinking. I'm not going to go doing things that violate any of the agreements that we have. If I make any behavioral changes, it would only be through talking to you about it. But all you need to know for now is I'm just working through some stuff. I don't want you to learn this later. I know you've been sensing that I've been struggling. And so for now, what if we just take it day by day, but I'll be communicating with you all along the way. I just need you to know I love you. I'm going through this, but I'm committed to you. And that's all I just wanted to say for now.
Okay. Well, it's really, really hard to hear, but I'm glad that you told me.
Okay.
Keep talking to me, please.
Okay.
I don't want to be blindsided by anything.
I will. I promise you, I won't surprise you with anything. And if I come to any really firm conclusions, I'll let you know. But I also am going to just be supportive of your journey, and I'm never going to try and tear your faith down or tell you things that are going to destroy your faith. Because I love and respect you too much. Okay, Carah, I'm curious if you have any reactions to that and if the viewers or listeners have any reactions as well.
Well, Elsie just wanted to say, sweetie, first clue that something is up, That kind of like almost puts a scary tone to it. But besides that,
so maybe don't use those types of terms.
I don't know.
If that wouldn't work.
the only reaction that I have is I'm just thinking, tell me if this is crazy. I almost wish we had data on this. How many people, even after listening to this is, a good idea, sit down, have this conversation, would actually do it because it is still so scary. You can have the tools, you can have everything. Because I'm trying to think back of how my husband or whoever discloses their loss of faith. It's like small snide comments over the course of like a year until something comes to the head where it's like, will you give our kid a blessing? And now it's like, now I need to tell you. It gets loud, but it gets loud, that saying, all right, now that our child's about to get baptized, or like we need to bless a baby, or somebody's asking for a blessing in the ward and you need to tell, and now you're suddenly fumbling for words.
Yeah.
And now as a wife, I'm like, oh, I'm getting it now. Now all of those snide comments are coming together. And like, I don't know what the right answer is because it's so difficult to have this conversation. It sounds so intense, but like, what can you do to give people reassurance that like you should have this conversation with, a level 5 with your spouse, your believing spouse? What can you do to give people the confidence to have this hard conversation?
Margie?
Oh, me?
Do you want me to answer?
If you have any answers, I don't know. It just seems like feels like a climbing Mount Kilimanjaro.
Okay.
Like I'd rather just not and just wait till I have to,
Yeah. And maybe that's the right thing. Maybe trickling it out over time is the right way. Sometimes that can just lead to this feeling that you're always tearing the church down and being negative about it.
And growing resentment.
Yeah.
Resentment can grow for the person who's doing that because they know they've got all this building up
They're bottling
inside
up
and they're
inside.
not. And for the spouse, because the spouse is like, what's with all the digs? Like over time you can accommodate, but usually as we accommodate, we build in resentment too and eventually blow.
That's
So neither of those
exactly.
are super great for the people.
The phrase choose your hard comes to mind.
Yeah.
That one of them's going to be hard.
Yeah.
I guess I'm answering my own question.
Yeah.
Like things are going to get hard no matter what. Just choose which one that you want to invest in. Like,
Exactly. And with the less is more approach, and I'm not saying it's the one true approach, but I'm just going to make the argument. With the less is more approach, let's just say Margie still is going to get as upset in the less is more approach as she did with the more is more approach. But isn't it better to just start with my relationship with the church is changing and I'm struggling with the church without introducing the added complexity of polygamy and polyandry and cult talk in the Book of Mormon? Because let's just say, Margi, you're still going to have that charged emotional reaction. Isn't it better to keep it simple than adding 2 and 3 and 4 other layers of complexity on in the conversation that give all sorts of different avenues for fear, for anxiety, and for insults and injury and explosion?
100%. And I think the word overwhelm comes to mind. That the more you kind of pile on during that conversation, the more you're apt to have a mind or, someone's sort of psychology blown in the moment. What you did in the second one that I do feel like tends to work, that's why I didn't give a pretty strong reaction, is you did a lot of calming to the, and most people do respond to, this is the work of John Gottman. It's called you can have a harsh startup, which you did the first time, and what happens when you start in a harsh way as opposed to what you did the second time. So there is science behind this, and I think most people do respond to being calmed. Not that they won't have uncomfortable feelings, but you're less likely to have that where you're both triggered and yelling at each other, per se. So, but yeah, the choose your hard. What I like about the thing about the first approach, where it's this steady drop, is it tends to harm your relationship with yourself, because on some level you're not saying what is inside you that you really want to say, even if there's fear around it. I think with people we love, we want to be known. So that starts to erode your relationship with yourself. And then it also erodes the relationship with your partner, because you got to build. You've got an anger build, and you've got a pattern of behavior over time developing that erodes the relationship, and it actually breeds distrust. Because if I have a partner that's saying snide things about something I treasure or is important to me, I'm going to not trust them as much. I'm going to be like, what's going on? Like, that's something and it will erode over time. And so that's what we don't want. With this, I do feel like it takes a lot of courage, but just like a wound, has to kind of be opened and have things it has to be cleansed to heal. Let's open it up. Let's get it to the point that we can actually get the stuff out and then move into sort of healing and kind of dealing with it. So yeah, that's kind of but yeah, there's no avoiding pain and suffering on some level in this scenario. Mm-hmm. It's just whether you want to strategize to increase your chances of minimizing damage long-term and increase the chances that you will have an intimate, shared, respectful evolution of a relationship.
Love it.
Yep. Well said. Do you mind if I read a couple comments?
Please.
This is a really good question by Tyler that asks, as a non-Mormon, is it much more common for a husband to initiate these discussions? How does a woman navigate the patriarchal nature of many Mormon marriages? So if you are like a woman who loses her faith and you're coming out to your husband, this was a moment at Thrive that I got chills at. I can't remember who said it. Tell me if you remember, Margie, where somebody said, it was during the panel, about how many times, maybe it was Donna Kelly, how many times in a Mormon marriage where you're in equal disagreement with your husband, and because they have the patriarchy, discussion's over.
Oh, I feel like it was Donna.
Did I say patriarchy? I meant to say priesthood, but
yeah.
Both. Anyway, does that sound familiar though?
Yeah.
And everyone was just like, yep, And like how many times where it's like, well, I'm sorry that you've lost your faith. I wonder how that women who lose their faith first in a marriage navigate that. I don't know the answer, but I think that's a really good thing to acknowledge.
That is an amazing question.
That the way that the priesthood plays out in marriages, the power dynamic. Yeah, like you can't deny that men throughout Mormon history have said, we're doing this thing come hell or high water because I have the priesthood, I have a more direct line to God, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to keep raising our family this way. You're going to need to put up with it. So I don't know. Maybe we can get into that another time, but I think that's a good thing to highlight.
It would be really cool to do like a a large survey about whether on average, what percentage of time it's the Mormon man who loses his faith first versus the woman. It was always my impression that more often than not, it's the man who loses his testimony first. Then I did a mixed faith marriage retreat where we had 20 couples, maybe it was 40, but it was exactly split in half, where in half the relationships, it was the woman who was the disbeliever, and in half it was the man. So that led me to believe that it can very much be equal. And so
I'm thinking, isn't statistically that more women side with progressive causes and movements and feminism, and that Mormon men are traditionally a lot more conservative? So I can imagine along those lines, maybe they're kind of buckling down to the conservative beliefs of the church, while women are more interested in progressive values that lead them out of the church, perhaps.
Yeah. On average, in my experience, and this is just averages, men tend to be a little bit more validity Mormons than utility Mormons, where they're like, wait, it's the history isn't what I thought. The truth claims, the archaeology and the DNA isn't what I thought. Okay, I'm leaving. That's not to say that women can't leave for validity or truth claims reasons, but I think maybe men slightly more often leave for the truth claims types of reasons. And I would say that's also true that women, maybe a little bit on average more than men, might leave because of the treatment of women, because of people of color, because of racism, because of the treatment of LGBT people. And I will add just the feelings of the church isn't working for me. I'm tired. I'm worn out. The perfectionism is wearing me down.
Yeah.
I'm bored, or I'm just I'm not feeling edified. Maybe a little bit more on average, women would leave for those sorts of reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I really fit in well. I really love this Ex-Mormon community and all the things we're talking about with Thrive and stuff. So I was probably a utility Mormon at the time, because as a woman in the church, that's where my friend circle is. That's where I'm edified. I'm not getting edified. The utility is, there's no utility at that point. And that's when I started turning into, well, what are the truth claims even to begin with, So women, maybe, I guess we're Relief Society and so many things. You're given that community, and if you're like, oh, what's wrong with me? Do I not fit in here? And wheels start turning.
Yeah. Thanks for that question.
I will say, can I just say a couple observations I have had some clients where, the woman left before their husband. So the wife came out and left, and it's been really, really messy with the priesthood and patriarchy being part of it.
Yeah, that's what I was curious
And it's much in more dramatic ways, and where it spreads to other areas of the relationship, and let alone that you also see a bit of a dynamic as even if the husband follows, you can see as the woman becomes more empowered that there are these tensions that come up as they try to redefine roles with that are, they can be deeply problematic.
It's a change in power dynamic, and
which can be much harder
Yeah.
in my experience, which is limited because I only see who I coach and who comes. So, but I see for men giving up power.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult.
Interesting.
It's kind of undeniable that in patriarchies and the Mormon church and the Mormon families are patriarchal, like literally they're patriarchal.
Yeah.
It's the husband who presides. I mean, that's in the proclamation on the family.
Yeah.
The husband presides and provides, and the woman's job is to nurture the kids. And that's in the proclamation on the family. And and when a wife loses her husband, or loses her faith first and is saying, I'm not down for this, and now I'm going to start feeling empowered and learn about feminism and get my own authority, it means there's a zero-sum game there. The husband is going to feel like he's losing power and authority. Now, that doesn't have to mean their marriage gets worse and their relationship gets worse. You can lose power, and I would argue, husbands, that if you can trust the process, you will lose power and improve your marriage. Because when a wife is more herself, more healthy, more happy, feeling stronger, she can have better mental health, better physical health, better emotional, and even sexual intimacy can come about as a result of your wife becoming more empowered.
Right on.
You agree?
Even though John is a man who said it, I could have said the exact same thing.
I should have let you say it.
No, you said it perfectly. And to that point, I just want to add that Mormons sometimes, I think, I was saying earlier, can be kind of surface level and not looking at the deeper things that are coming from, okay, my wife has a faith crisis. She could be gaining all this self-confidence and so on and so forth. But if all you're seeing is that she's not wearing her garments and now she's wearing a tank top and now you're going to have like a little lizard brain and you're like, oh, other men are looking at her. She's going to cheat on me. If you're looking at surface level things, you can get really frightened about your wife's faith crisis, I'm assuming. And I was telling John yesterday at lunch that even the things that 2 years after me and Aaron's leaving the church faith crisis, just me showing my body a tiny bit more than normal, like slowly acclimating myself to like a crop top, to
your own body,
to my own body. Like my husband's like, okay, I have to deal with this. I'm like having some emotions about this of like, yeah, isn't that crazy? Like we got married under the contract of like, I would be covering these parts of my body that they're only for you. And now that they're not, and they're like on TikTok, like, and I'm at Thrive in like a crop top, like, how you feeling about that? And he's like, oh, I have some like misogyny I need to like, untangle. So if you have to have, I luckily can have that conversation with a non-believing spouse. I cannot imagine how difficult that would be if you are not wearing your garments anymore as a non-believing wife and your husband is still feeling like they have ownership or whatever over you. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. Yeah. So on that note, I'm just going to go ahead and suggest that we have some type of panel. I want to have more non-believing, like mixed faith marriage discussions on Mormon Stories of how women untangle themselves from their husband presiding with patriarchy and priesthood, and how women grow into themselves, like John was saying. That'd be a really cool discussion. So I hope we can continue that later.
That's great.
Yeah. The one thing back to what you said is this idea of thinking about it like you need, oftentimes we look at relationship like, okay, here's what I would say to a priesthood holder, patriarchy husband who has a woman coming into her own, is like, this is an invitation for your relationship to actually become healthy, because you can never build a healthy relationship of intimacy with an unhealthy dynamic or an unhealthy human. So it's like, I do think it's interesting because oftentimes, and it's part of this is the way we've been brought up. It's like, okay, well, I feel like I'm healthy, and then I'm going to get with someone who's a little less healthy, but we're going to have a healthy relationship somehow. It's like it doesn't work that way. We have to independently bring our own happiness, our own health, our own well-being, our own purpose, our own vitality. And we each have to bring that to the relationship. But our relationship can only be as healthy as we are as individuals, period, full stop. It's not like coming together, we get to magically make health from unhealthy dynamics and unhealthy people.
Yeah, and can I add to that with this comment? I think it's perfect. Paige writes, I was first to lose faith. It took a long, I can't read. It took a long time to talk to my husband. Luckily, I have an amazing man, and he knows I'm smart and a critical thinker. He followed me with no conflict. And so if you have the highest degree of emotional intimacy is like trust in a marriage, where we're acting like that never happens, but let's also acknowledge that totally does. That there are the rare couples and the rare people where the emotional intimacy in a marriage is still so good,
sure.
Where like, I'm coming to you with this problem, I'm being open, I'm honest. Yeah. And the spouse is like, I trust you so implicitly that I know that you would never make such a intense decision if it wasn't really serious, and I want to hear everything.
Yes.
That does happen. You know?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And that's a cool standard. So I don't want to act like it never happens, because it does. And I've known friends who've had parents, Mormon parents in Orem, Utah, who their son sat their parents down and said, we've lost our faith as well as our spouses. And the parents' first response was, I respect you and your brother so much. Tell me, what have you learned? Yeah. And now they have to move out of Orem, Utah, because they're like a former bishop who lost his faith, It does happen rarely. And I think that's really cool to acknowledge that you can have such good emotional intimacy with your family members that they want to hear you out. But
Absolutely you can. And ultimately, everyone loses with patriarchy. Everyone loses with this idea of one person having more power than the other, men too. So think of it as an upgrade for everyone.
Upgrade for everyone. I love that.
Yeah. And Paul Hadlow writes, does anyone have to lose power? Can it be that the husband and wife could both become more powerful? I like that idea.
You won't see it at that maybe in the church right away.
It'll
But
take a while to get there.
Think of it as like the abundance model of
Yeah.
power,
Not a zero-sum.
not a luck.
Yeah. I have said before that a faith crisis doesn't so much ruin a marriage as it reveals a marriage. It basically shows you how grounded you guys are as best friends with unconditional love versus you're married because you both believe in the church.
That's great.
And, you guys have to figure that out, and you can still survive one way or the other, but it's certainly easier and smoother if you're best friends and unconditionally loving each other, regardless of the church. So,
And thinking about it like, okay, it's marriage number 2 or time for
yep,
marriage
time
number
for
4.
marriage number 3. Yeah.
right on. Yeah. Yeah. Like we were talking about earlier with
Yep.
Leah's marriage contract, and that you go through different cycles of marriages, and whether it's kids or you base your life on having a shared values around Mormonism or not. Like, it's really so cool that you can bond over a new set of values, even if you have to reevaluate them and even if it's hard. Like, there's so much beauty still.
Yep.
I love it. Really quickly, as we kind of round out this episode, there's one thing where Margi, in the more is more role play we did, you asked me for my sources, and what I recommend doing in the less is more approach is not becoming the teacher of your loved one. In other words, every doubting Mormon's dream is to have all their loved ones say, "What are you learning? Tell me what you're learning and where you're learning it from. How can I learn more?" That's the reaction we all desperately want and feel like we need. It almost never comes. Believers almost never want to know anything about why you lost your faith or where you learned your information from. But I would just say, even if they do, there's risk in answering those questions about what you've learned and where you've learned it from, or, providing detail. And the risks can be things like, number one, again, they ask you, you tell them, and then they still get upset. That's probably the most likely scenario. Even if they ask for the information, once you tell them, they could still get triggered and be upset. And so that's one of the risks. But then another risk is they can turn around and tell people that you were trying to get them to lose their faith. And I've seen this happen in wards, with bishops, with ward members, and in family relationships, that they ask, so you tell them all the things you've learned and all the reasons why you're doubting. Then they go tell everybody else what they learned from you. And then all of a sudden you're being blamed for trying to take their faith away when they asked to begin with. And then the third thing is that, especially if it's your significant other, right? Even if it's your spouse, you don't want to be married to your teacher. That's a power differential. You want to be married to your lover. You want to be married to your best friend and your lover, not their parent or their, teacher. You don't want your partner to be your parent. You don't want to be a child-like figure to your partner either. And so just letting them have their own journey and saying, I don't want to give you any of that information. If you beg and beg and beg over weeks and months, maybe I'll share with you the book that I read or the PDF that I read or some podcast episodes, but I want you to go on your own journey. And if you end up learning this stuff and or changing your belief, I want that to be fully your decision. And I don't want ever to be the one in the position of having taken your faith away from you. I want that to be your own walk and your own journey. And that's why I just, in the less is more approach, I generally discourage people from taking the bait to become the teacher of the believer who might be asking questions. Margi, what's your reaction to that? And then Carah, I'm curious if you have a reaction as well. Anything you want to?
I wholeheartedly
You agree?
agree
Okay.
and support that. Yep.
Carah, what do you think of when you hear me say that?
I have kind of a weird answer, so forgive me.
And there's no one right answer.
Okay. So the first thing that comes to my mind is, while I don't want to discredit that patriarchy is real and all of those things within marriage, I also want to add that the way that sexual shame culture and stuff, I think it's also plays into not just women's psyche, but men's psyche. And I think the power dynamic goes well in Mormon marriages. We talked about this in Drew Manning's episode. That was my first day working here. And we talked about from the very get-go, how unhealthy it is to set up a marriage where one's a porn addict and one's the one who's always checking on them, or one's in a faith crisis and one's the person like always sending them ensign things. I just see this through line, this repeated thing in a lot of unhealthy Mormon marriages where, oh, we have to get to this standard at all times. Like, oh, you have to get off of porn and we have to get this. We have to always be showing up on time. Like they have just mismatched ideas of what the high standard should be in the household. And John, you're kind of describing like let me be your teacher and how problematic that can be, because now the standard is get to where I'm at, as if that's always the right standard. And maybe that's not. Like, let's give up the idea of where I'm at as an atheist is where you should be.
That's so good.
So this is the nuance hoe really coming through.
Right on.
So like, I say this all the time in live streams when people ask me what they should do is like, I don't know your mental health. I don't know what pieces of Mormonism you're holding on to that keep you here, that keep you alive, that keep you able to function. And I don't want to be the cause of you giving that up. So for whatever it is within a Mormon marriage, whatever the imbalance is like, you need to get to this spot because I said so, because the prophet said so, or because I have a whole like gaggle of ex-Mormons over here and we know that we're right. You need to get to the other side, the ex-Mormon side. I just think we should give up the superiority of arrive at where I want you to arrive at. That's my opinion on it.
Ooh, that's so good. I feel like too that how often do we pick up the authority? It's like, well, we don't want that, but now I'll be the authority for you. Or I have a really great friend that works as a therapist in Logan who works with a lot of LDS, former LDS. She's really worked extensively in the population, who was telling me what I've noticed about the culture overall, Mormons, ex-Mormons, is they struggle with similar things. Mormons struggle with having all these expectations and judgments, and they have this way of, the world should look and things should be. But so do ex-Mormons. Ex-Mormons have a really firm idea of what an ex-Mormon life should look like and what it should feel and what you should do and how you should act, right? And she was saying the opposite. If people want to move beyond kind of Mormonism, you can't move into another paradigm, just another, structure of the way that you actually move out of it is choice. It's brilliant. From where we come from, high control, being told, everything's external. It's like, just let everyone choose. And if you can model that on some level, having patience and showing trust and generosity in this process with another human that may move at a different speed than you, that may have to sort through and have a different process than you, right? But that your concern is that person be able to choose, that person be able to have their own process. That's just, to me, a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. And I think we're kind of, to have a summary of a lot of the last 3 episodes we've done, we've been talking about the backfire effect. Mm-hmm. And then if you actually even want somebody to get to where you're at, you do need to make them feel safe. And we're just describing a level of safety right now, I think.
And maybe be honest about your agenda.
Right.
Be honest about how your needs may be making this really murky for your partner, right? Because you feel lonely or because now you're feeling in a new space and want to be joined.
Yeah, to kind of summarize what I'm hearing from you guys is, number one, differentiation. We used to think of it as sameness is good. We all need to believe and think and do the same things, and that's good. And a new mindset is differentiation is good. We can share the same values, some of the same core values, but if you think certain things differently than me, if you believe certain things differently than me, if you behave certain ways differently than me, there's actually a strength in that. It's diversity. It's individuality. There can be a strength to that. And so I really like this idea of individuation and
choice.
Choice and what is it? I just said the word, not differentiation. Differentiation, right? Is that what I said? Mm-hmm. Help me out.
You did say differentiation.
Yeah. That differentiation can be good. And then
Oxygen.
Yeah, it can be oxygen to the relationship because different people can bring different values to the relationship. But Carah, I also love what you said as well. You shouldn't necessarily want them to get to the same place as you, but ironically, you maximize the probability that someone is going to feel safe enough to start learning the information, which will then give them the best chance of eventually arriving at some of the same conclusions that you've arrived at by empowering them to take their own journey.
Yeah, by saying that right now, like if this was a real conversation between like a believing dad and me, that's exactly what I would say is like, I want to give you this space. I want you to be in the driver's seat of your life because no matter how much I want to like strangle you and be like, no, but you believe these dumb things, that air of superiority over somebody else is what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That air of like, but you're so dumb. You don't know what I know. If only you would just listen to me.
Yeah.
Like release that. It is just not conducive to what you're actually trying to achieve, a good relationship, even if you wanted them to leave. Because when people feel that of like, I'm sorry to use the porn example again, but one of the most frustrating things to me that I think is toxic in so many Mormon marriages is them starting with, my husband's a porn addict. And now we're constantly having like this constant wrestle of like,
policing his sexuality.
Policing sexuality, all of that stuff. Just like, you have to do what I want you to do. And you just constantly feel like there's like a mom, instead of husband and wife, it's like mom and a son that's always in trouble, that's always getting like suspended from school. I think that's such a toxic environment for any relationship, husband, wife, mother, son, daughter, all of that stuff. That's just like this ickiness that I think comes out of a place of ego that is just not conducive to her like human flourishing. That's kind of just, I'm trying to take like a little bit more of like a wider scope to like, what do we really want to achieve here? Like let's zoom out a little bit and think more intentionally about why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Why we're together.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if I had to just, I can make it's rare that I can kind of make guarantees in this business because the truth is, whoever you're disclosing to, you can't control where they're going to end up. They're ultimately going to have to go on their journey. But there are two things I can guarantee. The extent to which you try and force them to think and feel and to arrive at the conclusions you've arrived at, the degree to which you try and force them, you actually are going to strengthen them going in the opposite direction and slow down and reduce the probability that they'll ever arrive at the place where you've arrived. So that's number one. Resistance creates, control creates resistance. And if you try and control them or force them, I guarantee you will create that resistance. And then the second thing is, for the people whose spouses have eventually come around, it's been when they've backed off. So I can guarantee you increase your probability of eventually being on the same relative page with your partner or spouse or loved one. If you back off, let them feel unconditionally loved, and then let them have their own journey. I can guarantee you're going to increase your probability of eventually arriving on the same page. I can guarantee those two things.
Yeah, because it sounds like what you're saying is like you're taking your foot off the gas pedal of authority and control. Just take your foot off that gas pedal and you'll find that like you're able to fly downhill now.
Give them, to go with your metaphor, give them the steering wheel.
Yeah.
Give them control of their own gas pedal. Let them drive their own car and just let them feel like you're their coach cheering them on wherever they go. Much better than like trying to take over their steering wheel, take over their gas pedal, and then just make them want to jump out of the car.
Yeah. Now, can I ask the $1 million question though?
Yeah, this
is the question that I guarantee is running through everyone's minds right now is, all right, so we talked about earlier about, well, what if you have a believing spouse and they are taking their kids to church where they are learning harmful like LGBTQ messaging, or they're learning harmful things about like sexism or racism, or that just generally speaking, you're angry that your family or your parents or whoever are giving money to something that isn't true, and they need to know the truth because there are harmful messages in this. So how do we bring this discussion together of like, well, there's actual harm that you're teaching your kids here, while at the same time, all right, fine, go to church. I'm going to let you be in the driver's seat of your own life. How do you best negotiate those two really heavy problems that we're trying to. That seems like the $1 million elephant in the room question to me.
And I'm gonna do this intentionally. I think we should have that be another episode because I think that's its own episode. And I think it's a powerful one. Yeah. Maybe with a different title because that's slightly different than the disclosure piece.
Yeah.
But it's what comes next.
Next.
Let's write this down as a next major topic that we explore.
Yeah. It feels like the $1 million question. How do we go in with relationship? Because there are so many people, I've heard you guys, I'm sure have too. People say, because my family's in the church, because they support the church, and because I'm gay, or I have a child that's gay, or a million other different things, I won't have a relationship with my parents because they support the church. And that's its own topic that we have to probably go into.
And that's valid.
Yeah. I don't want to invalidate any of that. If that's what's best for your mental health and you cannot look your parents in the eye and actually act like everything's okay. Like, hi, when it's like, I know deep down that you like hate everything I stand for and I hate everything you stand for.
Yeah.
Like that's its own toxic brew that we have to figure out.
So we will do how to navigate mixed faith parenting and how to navigate mixed faith relationships. We will do that. Let's write that down, Carah. We promise that. With
an emphasis on like, and like, no.
Yeah.
Should we end with the acceptance piece?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So there's two pieces we want to end with. So we've now kind of laid out for you in 3 episodes our best advice for disclosing to a believing family or friend member. We want to end with kind of 2 reminders. One is boundaries. And so we're not going to go into boundaries today, but you will likely have your loved one want to violate your boundaries, whether it's by getting angry at you, insulting you, trying to control you, asking you questions you don't want to answer, trying to get involved in your marriage, trying to get involved with your kids, ward members trying to bring you back to church, bishops, potentially calling a disciplinary council. Believing Mormons, there are 1,000 ways they can and probably will try and violate your boundaries. And so we need to have a follow-up discussion about healthy boundaries. That can be its own episode, but just be prepared to have to boundary people that won't respect your boundaries. And frankly, in Mormonism, we're almost groomed to not have boundaries, to not believe it's okay to have boundaries, and not to enforce boundaries on other people. You're smiling, Carah.
I had this conversation with my mom yesterday. I'm really taking in the things that I learn here and like putting it into play with my mom. I literally had this conversation with her yesterday because she wants to talk to me about all of these Book of Mormon evidence things. And she wants me to read stuff. And I was like, just so you know that if you want this conversation to happen and you want me to talk about truth claims, I want you to be prepared that I'm going to respond to them and that might make you upset. But I don't want to read this book. I don't want to enter in this conversation if it's going to be upsetting to you. And I literally explained like conversational consent.
Yeah.
Like, just so you know, like in Mormonism, we're kind of groomed. I even said that to her yesterday. Like to answer questions from bishops. She agreed with me. She's like, I was like, I don't want to have conversations that are going to be upsetting to each of us, like either of us. So and
honestly, even if your mom says, I want to have the conversation, sometimes you are going to have to be the wiser
Right.
parent
To know.
and just say, I know this isn't going to go anywhere, and then put up the boundary.
Yeah. Like
sometimes that's required.
Yeah. Reading the body language, reading the signals that like when Mormons, they're like, oh, but I'm so right. I want to get into this with you and be like, this isn't quite fruitful.
It's not going to be good for us.
Or even you start it and then in the middle, you notice it going awry. And then
I notice you're getting a little bit emotional right now. And
we can.
These are heavy topics when you disagree on truth claims and what is actually a valid historical source. So there's definitely heat to the element, but I love that just yesterday I was able to, I do boundarying stuff. Did I tell you this? I told Margi this at Thrive though. You know what my mom said to me though?
What?
She said, I sounded so scripted and I did, but I sounded in my voice. And she's like, Carah, you sound really scripted right now. And I was like, oh, I forgot. I can't do a lot of the implementing this stuff because my parents know me too well. And I was like, oh, I don't talk like that, do I? So I got to be more clever with how I implement this stuff.
Yeah. And Margi, let's do an episode on boundaries because I just think, and you've got a lot of thoughts and expertise about boundaries. So we'll do an episode on boundaries, but it's an important part of this disclosure, true?
It's a huge part for sure.
Yeah. And then Margie, do you want to make a final point about acceptance? We've talked about that earlier.
Yeah, just a final point around this idea of accept that it's messy, accept that you can do all the right things and things can still end up feeling painful, feeling really uncomfortable, and where you experience a lot of loss. So there is plenty of acceptance, I feel like, to be practiced here. And also I'm going to pair the acceptance of kind of reality and what is and kind of the mess of it to be seek support. So seek support amidst like whether that's, a walk every day with a close friend, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a coach, you deserve support. Support is something that you should feel, it's like a form of self-love and showing up for yourself. And this is definitely one of the areas where I think support can make all the difference. And then my last thing would be celebrate your wins. Don't let other people's reactions steal from you those moments of your growth, those moments of you moving into your own, right? Coming into your own, advocating for yourself, differentiating from relationships that have had a strong hold over you for years and decades. So that's kind of my pairing. Accept that it's messy, accept that it hurts sometimes, accept that there's loss, seek support where you need it. You deserve it. It's something you deserve. And then celebrate your wins.
I love it. And I'll just say, get a therapist or a coach. We've got great therapists and coaches now in the post-Mormon space, whether it's Natasha Helfer, Margi, Leah Young, the people at Symmetry Solutions. There's so many, there's so many good therapists and coaches out there. Julie Diazevedo Hanks, so many good people. So get a coach or a therapist to help you through this disclosure process. It can really be helpful. And I'm just going to end as I began. If you are struggling with your faith crisis, with believing family and friends, parenting, if you're struggling with how to disclose, we are having a retreat just in a couple weeks, October 15th, 16th, and 17th. It's me, Natasha Helfer, and Margi for 2.5 days in Provo-Orem area. It's a faith transition retreat, and you can go to Mormon Faith Crisis. thrivebeyondreligion.com/events, and you can click on the link to sign up for this retreat. There are still a few spaces left. People have told us for years and years and years, this has saved their marriage, it's saved their lives, it's saved their family relationships. People make all sorts of mistakes, and then when they learn this information, they say, I wish I would have learned this information earlier. Well, you have a chance to. So you can come to the Thrive Center in Provo-Orem area, again, October 15th, 16th, and 17th. Me, Margi, and Natasha for 2.5 days will be there. You'll make new friends. You'll create new community. You'll get direct, hands-on, one-on-one or one-on-group support. And it can be really healing for you. So I just want to make sure and make that shout out. And then, of course, don't forget to register for Thrive Day, November 14th, 2021. It's going to be an amazing time. We hope to have 2,000 people in the Salt Palace, and Carah's going to be there, Margi, lots of other people. Don't forget to sign up for Thrive. That's the end of today's.
That's what we got.
Margi, thanks for joining us for the series.
Yeah, thank everyone for joining us too.
And if you really value Margi and Natasha and others coming on in this series for the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis, this sort of coaching help, we need you to support it. So please go to mormonfaithcrisis.com, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor, and those donations will be able to help us to keep bringing Margi back, to bring Natasha on, to bring other therapists and coaches on. We want to have healing and growth content as a part of the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook feed and YouTube feed and all the feeds. And so we need your support if you want to see this type of content continue. Please donate at become a monthly donor at mormonfaithcrisis.com, and that will allow us to keep it going. Any final words, Margi?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, you're lovely. It's great to have you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with my audience. I know they love and appreciate you.
Absolutely. And thanks to Carah and you and the audience. I really appreciate everyone showing up and sharing this with us. So,
Yeah, and Carah, it's so great to have you moderating the chats, providing input and feedback, and even sharing your wisdom with everybody. Thank you so much.
amazing wisdom.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. I'm working on some wisdom. Just 2 years post-faith crisis. But I just love this job. I love having these conversations. This feels like the most important things that are happening in the world sometimes happen in this room, where it just feels like these are the conversations that people are really needing. And the comments show that too. Like, people are really appreciative that we're having these conversations, giving people tools, role plays, just good motivation to get out there and do the hard work on themselves and in their relationship. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching. It's been really fun.
Well, Carah, you've helped up our game. You've helped re-energize Mormon Stories, and people love having you here. So thank you, Carah.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
We see you.
And Margi, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
And this ends our series on, disclosing to believing family and friends about a faith crisis. It's a 3-parter. We're going to put it together in one single post, kind of a part A, B, and C. We're going to put it all in one post. Please share this with if you have any family or friends or loved ones that are petrified or scared to disclose to believing family or friends. Please share this episode with other people. That's a great way you can support us in addition to your financial support. Just sharing the links, because if there's people that need this stuff and they never pay $1, but we help them save their marriage, improve their relationships, keep families divided. That's the overall mission of the Open Stories Foundation. That's why we all get up and do Mormon Stories, and we want that to be the outcome. So please share this with everybody. Thanks for your support. Give us your comments on the blog post or here on YouTube or on Facebook. We read every comment. We'll cherish it. We'll learn from it. Please give us your comments. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com if you have any feedback. And again, if you donate to Mormon Stories, thank you. Less than 1 out of 1,000 do donate. That's okay. If you can't donate, we still want you to benefit from the programming. But if you don't donate and you can, and you want to see it continue, please just become a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. Click on the donate button. This will pay for Carah. It pays for Gerardo. It pays for Brooklyn. It pays for me. It pays for these facilities, internet costs, cameras, lighting. All that stuff costs money, and we need your support. So please become a monthly donor, and we'll keep doing this stuff for as long as we can. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone who commented on Facebook and YouTube. Your comments make this more valuable, so thank you so much. All right, Carah, you're awesome.
Yeah, Margi, the Dehlins. It's always nice to hang out with the Dehlins for an afternoon.
And if you're loving this live stream and you're around tonight at 7:00, we're having John Larson back. We're going to be doing a live stream with John Larson about the
Willie and Martin handcart company.
Handcart companies. And it's going to be a treat because John Larson's always a treat.
It's going to be really fun.
And you guys just don't quit.
We don't quit.
You go into the night.
Carah's basically a slave driver. Like, I'm like, we need less content. And Carah's like, whoosh, we need more content.
Yeah, that's how it is. Definitely. That's the dynamic for sure.
Margie's not believing that.
This is fun to observe right here. What's going on?
My girls are always asking me, when's opposite day? Today's opposite day, girls. October 5th.
All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you guys all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast.
Love
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Love you guys.